Welcome to Mr. Hex. If you're looking for calm horror stories to help you sleep, or dark mysterious vibes to keep you company while working or relaxing, you're in the right place. Before we begin, don't forget to leave a like and a comment to help this video reach 1,000 likes and 1,000 comments. Thank you for your time. Now turn off the lights, relax, and let the story begin. I never should have ignored the old man's warning. That's what I keep telling myself as I huddle in this ranger station, my hands trembling as I write this account by lamplight. The wind howls outside, scratching at the windows like desperate fingers seeking entry. But it's not the wind I fear. My name is James Blackwood, and until 3 weeks ago, I was just another seasonal park ranger at Grand Canyon National Park. I'd taken the job after burning out from my corporate career in Phoenix. The canyon called to me, perhaps because of the stories my grandmother used to tell about our Cherokee ancestors and their deep connection to the land. Some places remember, James, she would say, her weathered hands working cornmeal dough. Some places hold on to what happens there. I thought I understood what she meant. I didn't. It began with Tsilagi Unadoplas, walking elk, a Cherokee elder I encountered during my second week on duty. I found him sitting alone at Yavapai Point just before sunset, long silver hair pulled back, eyes fixed on the deepening shadows across the vast chasm. "You shouldn't be out here so close to dusk, sir," I said, approaching with my official ranger smile. "The shuttles will be finishing their route soon." He didn't look at me, just kept staring into the canyon. "You have the old blood," he said finally. "I can see it in your face." "Cherokee?" I nodded, surprised. "My grandmother's side." "James Blackwood." I offered my hand. He ignored it. "This is not a good place for you to be, Utlevzav." He used the Cherokee word for whirlwind, a name I hadn't heard since my grandmother died. "I'm sorry." "The Aniga-Huga are restless. They've been disturbed." He finally turned to look at me, his eyes reflecting the dying sun. "The tall ones, the ancient people, they walk again." I'd heard all the legends growing up. Stories of Nunyunui, the stone giants, and Sulkalu, the slant-eyed giant of the hills. Folk tales to frighten children. I'd always thought, the tourist will be gone soon. I said gently, "Let me walk you back to the visitor center." His hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. "Listen to me, Utlvatstav. 3 hikers will vanish tomorrow in the western reaches, then 2 more by week's end. It begins. Stay away from Havasu Canyon when darkness falls. What walks there is older than your people or mine." I extracted my arm carefully. Another tourist with an overactive imagination, I thought. The canyon did that to people. Its immensity made them feel small, made them believe in ancient powers. "I'll keep that in mind, sir. Now please, let me escort you back." As we walked, he spoke quietly. "Your grandmother taught you nothing of respect. The old ways?" "She taught me plenty," I said, a defensive edge in my voice. "But this is a national park, not a haunted forest." He stopped, shaking his head sadly. "The park boundaries mean nothing to them. They were here before the first human laid eyes on this place. They will remain when the last of us is dust." I dropped him off at the visitor center and thought little more of it. Just another day dealing with the eccentrics drawn to natural wonders, until the next morning, when the call came in about 3 missing hikers. In the western reaches of the park, the search began immediately. Standard procedure: helicopter sweeps, ground teams, canine units. I was assigned to coordinate with local emergency services. As reports filtered in, a cold feeling settled in my stomach. The hikers, 2 men and a woman from Illinois, had last been seen heading toward a side trail near Havasu Canyon. "They probably just got lost and their phones died," my supervisor, Ranger Martinez, said. "Happens all the time with these amateur hikers." But I couldn't shake Walking Elk's words from my mind. By sunset, we'd found nothing. No tracks leading away from the trail, no personal items, no distress signals. It was as if they'd simply vanished into the landscape. That night, I couldn't sleep. I pored over maps of the search area, looking for anything we might have missed. Caves, rock shelters, unofficial trails. Around 3 a.m., I pulled out my grandmother's journal, a weathered leather book filled with Cherokee stories and teachings I'd kept but rarely read. I found a section about the Aniga-Huga, the ancient ones. According to Cherokee legend, they were a race of giants who lived in the mountains long before humans arrived. Some stories claimed they retreated underground when people came, living in vast cave systems. Others said they transformed themselves into something neither human nor animal. The Aniga-Huga avoid the places of men, my grandmother had written. But when disturbed, they will take what they believe is theirs. I closed the book, telling myself I was being ridiculous. These were just stories, cultural metaphors, not literal beings. The missing hikers had a rational explanation. They always did. 2 days later, a family of two, father and teenage daughter, disappeared from the same region. The park went into high alert. The media descended. Theories multiplied. Serial killer, human trafficking, drug cartel activity. No one mentioned ancient giants. Why would they? Martinez pulled me aside after the morning briefing. "You look like hell, Blackwood." "Not sleeping well," I admitted. "Look, I know these disappearances are unsettling, but we need to stay focused. The director's breathing down my neck, and the FBI is sending a team. I need you sharp." I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. "Has anyone interviewed the Cherokee elder? The one who was at Yavapai Point a few days ago?" Martinez frowned. "What elder?" "Older man, long silver hair. Goes by Walking Elk. No one matching that description has come through official channels." "Why?" I hesitated. "Just someone I talked to who seemed to know the area well." That evening, after my shift, I drove to the nearby community of Supai to look for Walking Elk. The Havasupai Reservation bordered the park, and if he was a local elder, someone there would know him. At the Tribal Community Center, I showed his photo to the receptionist, a picture I'd managed to take discreetly when walking him back to the visitor center. She stared at it, then at me, her expression unreadable. "Where did you see this man?" she asked quietly. "At the canyon, Yavapai Point. He called himself Salagi Unadalivza." She said something in her native language to an older woman nearby, who approached and studied the photo. "This is not possible," the older woman said. "This man was my grandfather's uncle. Salagi Unadalivza died in 1943. A chill ran through me. There must be some mistake. I spoke with him 3 days ago." They exchanged looks. The older woman took my arm and led me to a quiet corner. "Listen carefully, Ranger. There are places in the canyon where the veil is thin, where those who have passed sometimes return to warn the living." She lowered her voice. "What did he tell you?" I swallowed hard. "He said the Anagahuga are restless, that they've been disturbed." Her face paled. "And people are now missing. It wasn't a question. 5 so far." She closed her eyes briefly. "It has happened before, in my grandfather's time, in his grandfather's time." "What has? The awakening?" She looked toward the darkening canyon visible through the windows. "Did he tell you how to stop it?" I shook my head. "Then you must find him again, before more are taken." As I drove back to my ranger station that night, the canyon walls loomed black against the star-filled sky. For the first time since arriving, I felt like an intruder here, a trespasser in an ancient domain where humans were merely tolerated, not welcomed. And somewhere in those depths, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was stirring. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time, something that was now awake and hungry. The morning briefing was tense. 2 more hikers had gone missing overnight. A honeymooning couple from Seattle who'd ventured out for a sunrise hike and never returned to their lodge. Their rental car remained in the parking lot, backpacks and supplies untouched inside. "That's 7 people in 5 days, Martinez said grimly, addressing the assembled search teams. "The FBI is officially classifying this as a potential serial predator situation. Agent Reynolds will be coordinating with us starting today." Reynolds was a stern-faced woman with short gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She immediately took control of the briefing, outlining new search protocols and establishing a task force headquarters. "We believe we're dealing with a human predator," she stated flatly. "Possibly someone with intimate knowledge of the canyon's remote areas, maybe even someone posing as park personnel." Her gaze swept across the room, lingering momentarily on each ranger. The implication was clear. No one was above suspicion. After the briefing, I approached her with my topographical maps. "Agent Reynolds, I've been analyzing potential hiding places within the search radius. There's a network of smaller canyons and caves here." I pointed to an area near Havasu Falls that could provide shelter and would be nearly impossible to spot from the air. She studied the map. "You know this area well. I've hiked most of it. My family has connections to this region." "Cherokee, right?" she asked, surprising me. "I read your personnel file. Interesting that all the disappearances have occurred in areas with significant Native American historical sites." I stiffened. "What are you suggesting?" "Nothing yet, just noting patterns." She folded the map. "I want you on the ground team heading to this cave network. Your knowledge could be valuable." As she walked away, I felt a growing unease. Her comment about Native American sites wasn't coincidental. The missing persons had all vanished near areas considered sacred by several tribes. places where ancient dwellings and pictographs could be found, places where the veil might be thin, as the woman at the reservation had said. The ground team assembled at dawn the next day. Myself, 2 other rangers, a local guide from the Havasupai tribe named Michael, and a FBI tactical agent. We descended into the western reaches of the canyon, the morning sun casting long shadows across the red rock formations. The caves are about 4 miles ahead, Michael said as we hiked. My people don't go there much anymore. Why not? Asked Agent Harris, the FBI tactical member. Michael shrugged. Bad dreams. We continued in silence after that, each lost in our own thoughts. The canyon changed as we hiked deeper, the tourist-friendly paths giving way to rougher terrain. The colors intensified. Deeper reds, more vivid oranges, shadows of purple in the recesses of the rock. By midday, we reached the cave network I'd identified. From the outside, they looked unremarkable. Just dark openings in the striated canyon wall, partially obscured by stunted juniper trees. We'll check each one systematically, I said, unslinging my pack. Document everything. Look for any signs of recent human activity, or non-human activity, Michael murmured, so quietly I barely caught it. The first 2 caves yielded nothing, just limestone chambers that extended about 50 feet before narrowing into impassable crevices. The third was more promising. It opened into a larger chamber with evidence of ancient habitation, smoke stains on the ceiling, worn depressions in the floor where grinding had once occurred. Ancestral pueblo in sight, Michael confirmed, examining pictographs on the wall. Very old. I moved deeper into the chamber, my flashlight beam dancing across the rock walls. The pictographs changed as I went, the typical hunting scenes and handprints giving way to something else. Tall, elongated figures towering over human forms. Strange symbols I didn't recognize. Michael, I called. Can you identify these? He joined me, his expression growing troubled as his light played across the ancient images. These are not from my people, but we have similar stories, he said quietly. They depict the tall ones. What your people might call Sulkalu. Sasquatch? Bigfoot? Agent Harris asked with undisguised skepticism. Michael shook his head. Those are simplifications. The tall ones were ancient when humans first came to this land. They are guardians in some stories. In others they are judges. They take those who disrespect the sacred places. Harris snorted. Well, unless they left footprints or hair samples, they're not much use to our investigation. I continued examining the pictographs, my light catching something unusual on the cave floor beneath them. Kneeling, I found a small depression filled with what looked like fresh offerings. Corn pollen, small carved stones, feathers bound with red thread. Someone's been here recently, I said, looking to Michael. His face had gone pale. These are appeasement offerings. Someone is trying to calm the tall ones, or someone's creating an elaborate backstory for their crimes, Harris interjected, making it look supernatural to throw us off the trail. Before I could respond, our radios crackled to life. Ground team, this is command. We have a situation. Another disappearance reported 20 minutes ago. Solo hiker, male, 40s, last seen near your position. Emergency transponder activated briefly, then went silent. Harris immediately took charge. Copy command. Coordinates? Sending now. Approximately half-mile northwest of your position. We gathered our gear quickly, tension thick in the air. As we prepared to leave the cave, I noticed Michael lingering by the pictographs, whispering something in his native language. What are you doing? I asked quietly. Asking permission to pass safely, he replied, meeting my eyes. You should do the same, Util Vetstav. I froze. What did you call me? It is what they call you, is it not? The whirlwind. I can see why. He nodded toward the cave entrance. We should go. It will be dark soon. We don't want to be in these canyons after sunset. The coordinates led us to a narrow slot canyon. The hiker's emergency transponder lay on the ground, intact but silent, next to a top-of-the-line backpack. A water bottle was tipped over nearby, water still dripping from its mouth. A camera with a broken strap lay several feet away. Looks like signs of a struggle, Harris said, photographing the scene. I knelt by some markings in the sandy soil. They resembled footprints but were unlike any I'd seen before. Enormously wide, with distinct toe impressions nearly twice the size of my own boot. Got tracks here, I called. Harris joined me, frowning. What the hell made these? A bear? I shook my head. Bears leave claw marks. These are feet. Big ones. Someone wearing oversized boots to disguise their tracks, Harris decided. But I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. The tracks led deeper into the slot canyon, which narrowed as it wound between towering walls of striated red rock. The air grew noticeably cooler as we followed the footprints, the sunlight unable to reach the canyon floor. Michael suddenly stopped. "We should turn back. We have a missing hiker," Harris countered. "Possibly injured." "He is gone," Michael said with certainty. "And we will be too if we continue as night approaches." Harris looked ready to argue, but I intervened. "It'll be dark in less than an hour. This canyon gets dangerous at night. Flash floods, temperature drops. We mark this location, return to base, and come back at first light with more resources." Harris reluctantly agreed, and we began our return journey. As we hiked, I felt a growing sensation of being watched. Several times I turned quickly, certain I would catch sight of something following us, but there was only the empty trail and lengthening shadows. About a mile from our extraction point we heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the natural symphony of the canyon. A low, rumbling vocalization that was neither human nor any animal I recognized. It echoed off the canyon walls, making it impossible to pinpoint the source. We all stopped, instinctively moving closer together. "Mountain lion?" one of the other rangers suggested, his hand moving to his sidearm. The sound came again, longer this time, modulating in a way that felt almost like language. The hairs on my neck stood up. Whatever was making that sound was big. Very big. "Move," Michael said quietly but urgently. "Now. Don't run, but don't stop." We increased our pace, the sound following us, sometimes seeming to come from ahead rather than behind. As the shadows lengthened, rock formations took on ominous shapes in my peripheral vision, tall, moving silhouettes that vanished when I turned to look directly. The radio crackled again, command checking on our status, but the transmission was garbled, breaking up into static. The electronic interference only heightened our sense of isolation. We reached the extraction point just as the sun dipped below the canyon rim. The helicopter was waiting, its rotors already spinning. As we climbed aboard, I looked back at the darkening canyon. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something standing on a ridge above us. A tall, massive silhouette, watching our departure. Then the helicopter banked, and it was gone. Back at base, we debriefed with Reynolds and Martinez. Harris emphasized the signs of struggle and the strange tracks, suggesting a human perpetrator using misdirection and psychological tactics. When it was my turn to report, I found myself hesitating. How could I explain the feeling that had gripped me in that canyon? The certainty that we were being stalked by something ancient and intelligent. The strange tracks that resembled no human or animal print I'd ever seen. "Ranger Blackwood, your assessment," Reynolds prompted. "The scene was unusual," I began carefully. "The tracks we found don't match standard profiles, not human, not known wildlife, and there was a vocalization unlike anything native to the region." Reynolds studied me. "Are you suggesting something unnatural?" "I'm suggesting we consider all possibilities. There are aspects of these disappearances that don't fit conventional patterns." "Like what?" Martinez asked. "No bodies, no blood, no definitive evidence of violence despite signs of struggle, and all the disappearances happening in areas with significant historical importance to indigenous cultures." Reynolds leaned back, her expression unreadable. "We deal in evidence, Ranger Blackwood. Concrete, measurable evidence. Not local legends or supernatural speculation." I nodded, knowing I'd already pushed the boundaries of professional credibility. "Of course, I'm just noting unusual patterns." After the debriefing, Michael found me in the parking lot. "You feel it too," he said simply. "The presence in the canyon." I didn't deny it. "What do you know about this, Michael? Really know?" He looked toward the darkened silhouette of the canyon against the night sky. "My grandfather was part of a search party in 1972 when 3 hikers disappeared. He told me they found the same signs, giant footprints, strange sounds. They followed the tracks to a cave high on the canyon wall, accessible only by an ancient path. Inside, they found evidence of what? That the tall ones are real, that they take people who trespass in certain places." He met my gaze. "My grandfather would never speak of exactly what they found. He only said that afterward the tribal council placed permanent restrictions on certain areas, places where the membrane between worlds is thin." "And you think that's what's happening now? These tall ones are taking people?" "I think someone has disturbed something ancient. Broken an old agreement." He handed me a small leather pouch. "Keep this with you. It offers some protection." Inside was a mixture of herbs and what looked like cornmeal. Protection against what exactly? Against being taken. He turned to go, then paused. "The old Cherokee man you met, did he tell you how to stop this?" I shook my head. "Only warnings, nothing about a solution." "Then you need to find him again. Soon. Michael's expression was grave. Before whatever is in the canyon decides to expand its hunting grounds, that night, I dreamed of the canyon, of standing on a high ledge looking down into unimaginable darkness. From that darkness came sounds, the same vocalizations we'd heard but clearer now, forming patterns that almost made sense to my sleeping mind. And from the shadows emerged a figure, enormous, covered in dark hair, its face a blend of human and something else, eyes reflecting red in the dreamlight. Behind it stood Walking Elk, his expression solemn. "You must find the gateway, Utilvitstav," he said in my dream. "The place where they cross over. Seal it before the solstice moon." I woke with a start, the leather pouch Michael had given me clutched tightly in my hand. Outside my window, the canyon was a black void against the star-filled sky, and somewhere in that void, I knew with inexplicable certainty, something was hunting. The next day dawned with an unnatural stillness. No wind stirred the juniper trees outside my cabin, no birds called from the canyon rim. Even the constant stream of tourists seemed subdued, as if the park itself was holding its breath. I reported for duty early, reviewing the night's incident reports. No new disappearances, small mercy, but several unusual wildlife sightings had been called in. Visitors described seeing an extremely large animal moving along the north rim around dusk. Rangers dispatched to investigate found nothing but some broken branches high up on the trees, too high for deer or elk to reach. During the morning briefing, Reynolds announced a significant expansion of the search operation. "We're bringing in specialized tracking teams from multiple agencies," she explained, indicating points on the map. "The focus will be on these cave systems and remote canyons. We're also installing motion-activated camera traps throughout the primary search area." Her gaze landed on me. "Ranger Blackwood, given your familiarity with the Western Reaches, I want you on Alpha Team. You'll be guiding a tactical unit through the area where we found the hikers' equipment yesterday." I nodded, though internally I questioned the wisdom of returning to that narrow canyon. Reynolds continued assigning teams, and I noticed that Michael had been excluded from today's operation. After the briefing, I sought him out at the Havasupai Cultural Center where he worked part-time as a guide. "They don't want me involved anymore," he explained when I asked. "Said they're focusing on law enforcement personnel only now." "Reynolds doesn't want your perspective clouding her investigation," I guessed. "She thinks I'm feeding into mass hysteria with tribal superstitions." His expression hardened. 7 people are missing, possibly dead, and she's worried about optics. I glanced around to ensure we weren't overheard. "I need to know more about the incident in 1972. What really happened? What did your grandfather find in that cave?" Michael hesitated, then nodded toward the door. "Not here." We walked to a small coffee shop in the nearby town, far from the ears of other park staff. Over strong black coffee, Michael spoke in low tones. "The official report says the 3 hikers in 72 died in a climbing accident. Their bodies were never recovered. Supposedly fell into a deep crevasse." He leaned forward. "But my grandfather told a different story on his deathbed." I waited as Michael gathered his thoughts. "The search party tracked unusual footprints to a cave high on the western wall. Inside they found a kind of nest, made of branches and clothing, some of it recognized as belonging to the missing hikers." He paused, and there were bones. Human bones, showing evidence of being consumed. A chill ran through me despite the warm coffee cup in my hands. "They found evidence of predation." He nodded grimly. "But that wasn't what terrified my grandfather, it was what they found deeper in the cave. A passageway that seemed to descend forever, and carved into the walls, images identical to those we saw yesterday. The tall ones taking human figures." "What did they do?" "Tribal elders performed a sealing ceremony. They believed the cave was a gateway between worlds, that it needed to be closed. For decades after, the disappearances stopped." He looked up at me. "Until now." "So something has broken the seal," I murmured. "Or someone." Michael's expression was grave. "There's been increased archaeological activity in the restricted zones. Universities with permits, some private research groups, disturbing sites that should have been left alone." I thought of Walking Elk's warning and my strange dream. "The gateway," I said. "We need to find it again." Michael shook his head. "The location of the cave was deliberately obscured in all records. Only the elders knew, and the last one who participated in the sealing died years ago. But there must be some record, some clue." My radio squawked to life. "Ranger Blackwood, report to command immediately. Alpha Team is deploying in 30 minutes. I stood reluctantly. "I need to go. But this isn't finished. Can you look into tribal records? Any mention of the cave or the sealing ritual? I'll try. But be careful out there today. Michael pressed something into my hand, another small leather pouch. Wear this. Don't take it off no matter what. Alpha team consisted of myself, 2 FBI tactical agents, and a wildlife expert from Arizona Game and Fish. We were dropped by helicopter at the entrance to the slot canyon where we'd found the hikers' equipment. Our mission to thoroughly document the area and set up surveillance equipment. We're looking for any evidence of human presence, Agent Carter, the team leader, instructed as we checked our gear. Footprints, hair, fibers, biological material. If our perpetrator is hiding out here, they've left traces. The wildlife expert, Dr. Lenore Gray, seemed skeptical. I still think we should be considering non-human predators. A canyon lion could easily drag prey into a den that's inaccessible to your search teams. A canyon lion doesn't remove someone's backpack and leave their water bottle neatly beside it, Carter replied dryly. As they continued discussing possibilities, I surveyed our surroundings. The slot canyon felt different today, the air heavier, the shadows deeper despite the mid-morning sun. The leather pouch Michael had given me hung around my neck beneath my uniform shirt, its presence strangely comforting. We moved deeper into the canyon, following the same path as yesterday. I led the way, alert for any sign of the strange tracks we'd discovered. But the sandy soil showed only our own footprints from the previous day. The others had been erased, either by wind or something else. Tracks have been obscured, I reported. Possibly intentionally, Carter frowned. Natural causes more likely. Let's continue to the primary site. We reached the location where the hikers' equipment had been found. The backpack and transponder were gone, collected as evidence, but the site had been marked with small flags. Dr. Gray immediately began examining the area, taking soil samples and looking for hair or scat. I want camera traps here, here, and there, Carter directed, pointing to strategic locations. Full coverage of the approach and the site itself. As the others set up the equipment, I found myself drawn further into the canyon, toward the direction the strange tracks had led. Something felt different about this section, the temperature noticeably cooler, the air quality changing subtly, becoming damper. About 50 yards beyond the main site, the canyon narrowed dramatically, the walls rising near vertical on either side. The ground showed signs of recent water flow. A flash flood had carved new patterns in the sand, and there, partially exposed in the newly eroded bank, was something that didn't belong. A hiking boot. Modern, expensive, half buried in the sand. Over here, I called, carefully approaching the find. The team joined me quickly. Carter photographed the boot in situ before carefully excavating around it. It was empty, no foot inside, but the laces were still tied in a double knot. How does someone lose a boot without untying it? Dr. Gray wondered aloud. They don't, Carter said grimly. Not voluntarily. I surveyed the area more broadly, noting how the flash flood had reshaped the terrain. The water came through here with significant force, could have uncovered evidence that was deliberately buried. We began a methodical search of the flood path, finding more disturbing items: a torn piece of backpack strap, a crushed water filter, a single trekking pole snapped in half, all consistent with the equipment carried by the missing hikers. As we worked our way deeper into the narrowing canyon, I became increasingly uneasy. The walls seemed to press closer, the shadows darker despite the midday sun now directly overhead. Several times I thought I heard something, a scraping sound from above, the subtle shift of loose rock, but saw nothing when I looked up. Dr. Gray paused suddenly, crouching to examine something on the canyon wall about 7 feet up. Interesting, she murmured, photographing what looked like marks in the red stone. What is it? I asked, joining her. Claw marks, but not from any predator I recognize. She ran her fingers along the deep grooves. Whatever made these was large, and the pattern is unusual, more like fingers than animal claws. Carter joined us, frowning at the marks. Could be man-made, someone trying to simulate animal activity. Dr. Gray shook her head. These were made with significant force. Look how deep they cut into the rock, and the spacing, much wider than human hands could manage. I stared at the marks, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. They resembled gigantic handprints, as if something massive had braced itself against the canyon wall while climbing. Carter instructed one of the other agents to place a camera trap with a clear view of the marks. Then we continued deeper into the canyon. The passage grew narrower still, until we were moving single file between walls so close I could touch both sides simultaneously. Then the canyon opened suddenly into a small circular chamber, a dead end perhaps 30 feet across, surrounded by sheer walls rising hundreds of feet. The ground was sandy, with a small spring bubbling from the base of the far wall, creating a shallow pool. Perfect ambush spot, Carter muttered, his hand resting on his sidearm as he surveyed the enclosure. But something else had caught my attention. On the far wall, partially hidden behind a stunted juniper, was an opening, a dark crevice that appeared to lead deeper into the rock face. "There's a cave," I said, pointing. We approached cautiously. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through sideways, but opened into darkness beyond. Cool air flowed from the gap, carrying a musty organic smell. This wasn't on any of our maps, I noted, shining my flashlight into the darkness. The beam illuminated a passageway that twisted out of sight after about 20 feet. "Perfect hiding place," Carter said. "We need to check it out." Dr. Gray looked uneasy. "That passage could go for miles. The canyon is riddled with unmapped cave systems." Carter radioed our position to base, requesting backup before we proceeded further. "Sit tight," he ordered after finishing the transmission. "Support team will be here in 30 minutes. No one enters that cave until we have proper backup." We used the time to set up additional camera traps and collect samples from around the spring. I found myself repeatedly drawn back to the cave entrance, shining my light into the darkness, trying to see what lay beyond the first bend. During one such examination, I noticed something I'd missed before: markings carved into the rock beside the opening. Ancient, weathered by time, but still visible. They matched the pictographs we'd seen in the other cave, elongated figures standing over smaller human forms. A marker, a warning. Before I could point this out to the others, a sound echoed through the chamber. A deep, rumbling vocalization similar to what we'd heard yesterday, but closer, much closer. We all froze, instinctively moving back to back in the center of the enclosure. "Mountain lion?" the other FBI agent suggested, drawing his weapon. Dr. Gray shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. Not a feline vocalization, not canine either. The sound came again, a low, modulating growl that seemed to reverberate from the very rocks around us. I couldn't pinpoint the source. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Get the thermal imager," Carter ordered his partner, who quickly retrieved a device from his pack. As he scanned the walls around us, my eyes were drawn upward. The rim of the enclosure was in shadow, the midday sun not quite reaching it. And there, at the edge of that shadow, something moved. "Something big." "There," I said quietly, nodding upward without making any sudden movements. Everyone looked up. For several heartbeats I saw nothing, just shadows and the red rock of the canyon wall. Then it moved again, and I caught a glimpse of dark fur, a massive limb, a shape that didn't belong among the rocks. "What the hell is that?" Carter whispered, raising his rifle slowly. Before anyone could respond, the thermal imager beeped loudly as it detected the heat signature. The sound echoed in the enclosed space, and the shape above us moved with startling speed. A cascade of small rocks preceded its descent as it scrambled down the sheer cliff face with impossible agility for something so large. We caught only glimpses. A powerful limb here, a flash of movement there, as it descended into the shadows at the base of the wall. "Contact! Contact!" Carter shouted into his radio, backing toward the narrow canyon entrance. "Unknown large predator, possibly bear, requesting immediate extraction." But it wasn't a bear. As it emerged partially from the shadows, I got my first clear look, and my blood ran cold. It stood at least 8 feet tall, bipedal but hunched forward, covered in dark reddish-brown fur that blended perfectly with the canyon walls. Its limbs were long and powerfully muscled, ending in hands, yes, hands with opposable thumbs and what looked like curved claws or talons. Its face remained in shadow, but I caught the gleam of eyes reflecting our flashlight beams, and the outline of a head that seemed too small for its massive frame. Dr. Gray gasped beside me. "That's not possible," she whispered. "That's not a known species." The creature remained at the edge of the shadows, watching us. It made that rumbling vocalization again, but up close it sounded more complex, almost like speech, but in no language I recognized. "Back out slowly," Carter ordered, his rifle trained on the creature. No sudden movements. We began to retreat toward the narrow canyon entrance, moving as one unit. The creature watched but didn't advance, continuing its strange vocalizations. Then Dr. Gray stumbled on a rock, momentarily breaking formation. The creature moved with explosive speed, not toward her but toward the cave entrance. In 3 massive strides it reached the narrow opening and positioned itself there, effectively cutting off our escape route. "Hold fire," Carter ordered as his partner raised his weapon. "We don't know what we're dealing with." The creature made another sound, higher pitched this time, almost like a question. Then it did something none of us expected. It raised one massive hand and pointed directly at me, at the leather pouch hanging visibly outside my shirt, dislodged during our hasty movements. A coldness spread through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. It recognized the pouch. It knew what it was. "It's intelligent," I said quietly. "It's trying to communicate." "Bullshit," Carter replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's an animal, a predator." "Look at its eyes," Dr. Gray whispered. I forced myself to meet the creature's gaze. Its eyes were deep-set beneath a heavy brow, but undeniably intelligent, aware and calculating in a way no animal's eyes could be. It made another sound, then deliberately backed into the cave entrance, its massive form barely fitting through the narrow opening. It continued watching us, making no move to attack but clearly guarding the passage. "It's protecting the cave," I realized aloud. "That's what this is about. The cave is important." Carter's radio crackled to life. "Alpha Team, extraction team is 2 minutes out. Confirm your status." "We are pinned down by an unidentified large predator," Carter replied, his voice steady despite the extraordinary situation. "It's blocking our primary exit route, but maintaining distance, possibly territorial behavior." As the sound of an approaching helicopter reached us, the creature looked up, then back at us. It made one final vocalization, longer, more complex than the others, then disappeared into the darkness of the cave. We remained frozen in place for several moments, weapons trained on the now empty cave entrance. "What the hell just happened?" Carter's partner finally broke the silence. "I think," I said slowly, "we just met what's been taking people." Dr. Gray was already documenting the encounter, her scientific training overriding her fear. The physiological characteristics, bipedal locomotion, opposable thumbs, facial structure, they're consistent with some form of hominid. But the size, the fur pattern, she shook her head in disbelief. "This could be an undocumented species, or," I said quietly, "it could be exactly what the indigenous stories describe. An ancient one, a guardian." Carter gave me a sharp look. "Let's stick to facts, Ranger. We encountered an unidentified large animal, nothing more." But as the helicopter descended and we prepared for extraction, I couldn't shake what I'd seen in those intelligent eyes. Recognition, calculation, and something else. A warning. The creature hadn't attacked when it had every opportunity. It had merely blocked access to the cave, to what Michael had called the gateway, to what Walking Elk had warned me about in my dream. As we lifted off, I looked back at the narrow opening in the rock face. For a moment I thought I saw the creature watching our departure from the shadows. Then we banked away, and the enclosure vanished from view. But I knew with absolute certainty we hadn't seen the last of the guardian of the canyon and the gateway it protected. The base camp was chaos when we returned. News of our encounter had spread like wildfire, and a crowd of park officials, law enforcement, and scientific personnel swarmed around us as we disembarked from the helicopter. Reynolds pulled Carter aside immediately, their conversation intense and private. Dr. Gray was whisked away by a team from the university's biology department, her recorded data and samples becoming the center of attention. Amidst the commotion, I slipped away. I needed to find Michael to tell him what we'd seen, what I now believed with growing certainty. The tall ones were real, and they were protecting something in that cave. I found him at his home on the reservation, a modest house with a view of the Western Canyon. His expression told me he already knew something had happened. "You saw it," he said simply when I entered. I nodded, collapsing into a chair, the adrenaline crash hitting me hard. It was not what I expected, not a mindless predator. It was intelligent, Michael. It recognized the pouch you gave me. He poured me a cup of strong coffee, adding something from a small flask. "Medicine," he explained, "for the shock." The drink burned going down but steadied my nerves. I described the encounter in detail, the creature's appearance, its behavior, how it had deliberately blocked access to the cave. "It's protecting the gateway," Michael said, confirming my suspicion, "as it has always done. But why take people? Why now, after decades of peace?" Michael sat heavily across from me. "I've been speaking with the elders. There was a research expedition 3 months ago, archaeologists with special permits to explore restricted areas. They were documenting pictographs when they found something. The Gateway Cave, a sealed entrance they broke through thinking it was just another burial chamber." His expression darkened. "They disturbed the seals placed there in 1972. And something else." "What?" "They removed artifacts, sacred objects that were part of the binding." He met my gaze. "Objects that need to be returned." A cold certainty settled over me. "That's why it's taking people. It's trying to force the return of what was stolen." Michael nodded grimly. The elders believe so. The tall ones are guardians of thresholds between worlds. When the gateway was sealed properly, with the sacred objects in place, they remained dormant. Now they're active again, and angry, so we need to find these artifacts and return them to the cave. It's not that simple. The research team cataloged everything they removed. Most items were sent to the university's collection. He pulled out a folder containing photocopied documents. But 3 objects were classified as items of unique significance and transferred to a private collector. I scanned the papers, official transfer documents, permits, receipts. Who authorized this? These were found on protected land, someone with connections. The paperwork is all technically legal, but ethically. He shook his head in disgust. One name appeared repeatedly in the documentation: Elliot Chamberlain, billionaire tech entrepreneur and notorious collector of indigenous artifacts. His private museum in Sedona housed one of the largest collections of Native American items in private hands, many acquired through questionable means. Chamberlain has them, I said, reading further. 3 objects: a carved stone tablet, a ceremonial bowl made of clay, and something described as a ritual staff with unique organic components. The binding objects, Michael confirmed. They need to be returned to the gateway and the proper ceremonies performed before the solstice moon. 4 days from now. I thought of Walking Elk's words in my dream. Seal it before the solstice moon. How do we get them back? Chamberlain isn't likely to hand over prize acquisitions because we ask nicely. Michael was quiet for a moment. There may be a way. Chamberlain is hosting a private viewing of his newest acquisitions tomorrow night, by invitation only. And you have an invitation? No. But Dr. Sarah Longfeather does. He slid another paper across the table. An elegant invitation addressed to the head of Native American Studies at the university. She's my cousin, and she's willing to help. The plan took shape quickly. Dr. Longfeather would attend the viewing with me as her research assistant. Once inside, we would document the location of the 3 objects. Michael and a tribal elder would wait nearby. Later that night, we would return and repatriate the sacred items. This is breaking and entering, I pointed out, though without much conviction. I'm a park ranger. I enforce laws. I don't break them. 7 people are missing, Michael reminded me quietly. Possibly dead. More will follow if the gateway remains open. Sometimes the right path isn't the legal one. I couldn't argue with his logic. Besides, something inside me, some deep intuition passed down through generations of Cherokee blood, told me this was the path I was meant to follow. The next day passed in a blur of preparation and mounting tension. Reynolds had ordered a full lockdown of the Western Canyon areas, deploying armed patrols and helicopter surveillance. The official story was of an unidentified large predator, possibly a bear, but rumors were spreading wildly among park staff. I reported for my shift, careful to maintain appearances, but my mind was on the evening's mission. Just before sunset, I changed into the formal attire Michael had provided, a dark suit with subtle indigenous design elements that would help me blend in at Chamberlain's event. Dr. Longfeather met us at the rendezvous point, a composed, distinguished woman in her 50s whose academic credentials were impeccable. If she had any qualms about our plan, she didn't show it. Chamberlain has been stealing our heritage for years, she said as we drove toward his Sedona estate. He calls himself a preservationist, but he's a trophy hunter. These items aren't decorations, they're sacred objects with spiritual power. Chamberlain's home was a modernist monstrosity perched on the red rocks overlooking Sedona, all glass and angular concrete that seemed to deliberately clash with the natural beauty surrounding it. Security was tight but discreet, uniformed guards at the gates checking invitations, and others patrolling the grounds with earpieces and barely concealed weapons. The exhibition was housed in a purpose-built gallery attached to the main residence. As we entered, Dr. Longfeather slipped easily into her academic persona, greeting other guests with professional courtesy while I followed slightly behind, observing the layout and security measures. The gallery was arranged chronologically, with artifacts from different tribes and eras displayed in climate-controlled cases. The lighting was theatrical, designed to highlight the beauty of the objects rather than their cultural significance. We moved through the collection methodically, Dr. Longfeather engaging other guests in scholarly discussion as cover for our true purpose. Near the rear of the gallery, we found what we were looking for, a special display labeled Recent Acquisitions, Grand Canyon Ancestral Artifacts. 3 objects sat on illuminated pedestals: a flat stone tablet covered in unfamiliar symbols, a clay bowl painted with red and black designs, and a staff made from a twisted juniper branch adorned with feathers, crystals, and what looked like animal teeth. The binding objects, as we studied them, trying to appear merely academically interested, A voice spoke from behind us. Fascinating pieces, aren't they? Carbon dating places them at over 3,000 years old. I turned to find myself face to face with Elliot Chamberlain himself, a tall, thin man in his 60s with the tanned skin of someone who spent time outdoors but the soft hands of someone who had never worked with them. Dr. Longfeather smiled professionally. The craftsmanship is remarkable. Where were they discovered? If you don't mind my asking. A previously unexplored cave system in the western Grand Canyon, Chamberlain replied with evident pride. My research team had to seal down a sheer cliff face to reach the entrance. Quite the adventure. Were they found together? I asked, careful to maintain my cover as a research assistant. Chamberlain's gaze sharpened slightly as he looked at me. Yes, arranged in a very specific configuration around what appeared to be some kind of altar stone. Ritualistic placement, clearly. Fascinating, Dr. Longfeather murmured. Have you had the symbols on the tablet translated? Working on it. They don't match known indigenous writing systems. He leaned closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Between us, I believe they may be pre-Columbian, perhaps evidence of transoceanic contact. I bit back a reply, letting Dr. Longfeather steer the conversation towards safer academic topics. As they discussed dating methodologies, I casually surveyed the security system. Cameras in the corners, motion detectors near the pedestals, a guard stationed at each entrance. After extracting ourselves from Chamberlain's presence, we completed our circuit of the gallery before making our excuses and departing. In the car, Dr. Longfeather immediately called Michael. We've confirmed the objects are there. Security is substantial but not impenetrable. Main concerns are the cameras and alarm system. We met Michael and the elder, a thin-weathered man named Thomas, at a small motel outside Sedona. They had already prepared the necessary tools, black clothing, gloves, night vision goggles, and a device Michael claimed would temporarily disable electronic security systems. It creates a localized EMP, he explained. Military grade. Don't ask where I got it. The plan was simple but risky. We would return after midnight, when the exhibition was closed. Michael would disable the security system long enough for me to enter through a service entrance, retrieve the objects, and exit. Dr. Longfeather would remain as lookout, while Thomas performed protective ceremonies to mask our presence. The tall ones may be aware of what we're doing, Thomas warned, his voice soft but carrying authority. They have ways of seeing beyond our world. If they approve of our actions, they may help. If not, he left the implication hanging. Night fell. We waited, tension mounting as the hours passed. At 1 a.m. we moved into position. Chamberlain's estate was dark except for security lighting around the perimeter. Guards patrolled at regular intervals, their patterns predictable. Thomas began a quiet chant, burning a small bundle of herbs and waving the smoke over each of us. Protection, he whispered, and concealment. At precisely 1:17 a.m., Michael activated the device. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the security lights flickered and died, plunging the estate into darkness. Now, Michael urged. You have 3 minutes before the backup generators kick in. I moved quickly across the darkened grounds, staying low, using the shadows as cover. The service entrance was where our intelligence had indicated, a simple door with an electronic lock that now stood deactivated. Inside, I navigated by memory and the dim glow of my night vision goggles. The gallery was eerily silent, the artifacts now merely shapes in the darkness. I located the 3 objects quickly, wrapping each carefully in the specially prepared cloths Thomas had provided. As I secured the staff, the last of the 3 objects, I heard a sound that didn't belong. A deep rumbling vocalization that I recognized immediately, the same sound from the canyon. Impossible. We were miles from the park. I froze, scanning the darkness. Nothing moved, but the sound came again. Closer this time, as if something large was moving through the gallery. The lights flickered, the backup generators coming online. In that brief illumination, I caught a glimpse of something massive moving between the display cases. Something that shouldn't be here. One of the tall ones had followed us. Heart pounding, I secured the staff to my back and moved toward the exit, trying to remain silent. The creature made another sound, not threatening, but almost approving. Then the lights came on fully, and I heard shouts from outside. The guards had noticed the security breach. I had seconds to escape. I ran for the service door, the objects secure in my pack. As I reached the exit, I risked a final glance back, and saw it clearly for a moment. The same creature from the canyon, its massive form incongruous among the pristine display cases, its intelligent eyes meeting mine. It raised one enormous hand in what almost seemed like a gesture of acknowledgement. Then it melted into the shadows with impossible stealth for something so large. Outside, chaos had erupted. Guards shouted to each other, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. I used the confusion to my advantage, staying low and moving quickly toward our rendezvous point. Michael was waiting at the edge of the property, his face tense. "Did you get them?" I nodded, breathless. "But we're not alone. One of them is here." It followed us. His eyes widened. "The tall ones never leave the canyon." This one did. I described what I'd seen. Thomas, who had joined us, nodded grimly. "They are invested in our success. The gateway must be more unstable than we realized." We made it back to the vehicles without detection, though sirens were already wailing in the distance as we drove away. By dawn, we were back at the canyon, the stolen, reclaimed artifacts secure. News of the break-in was all over the local media by morning. A daring theft of priceless archaeological treasures from Chamberlain's private collection. No suspects had been identified, but security footage had apparently captured a large, unidentified figure moving through the gallery. The authorities would assume it was a person in disguise. Only we knew the truth. I reported for my shift at the ranger station as if nothing had happened, though exhaustion pulled at me. Reynolds was in a state of controlled fury. The search for the missing hikers had yielded nothing. The creature hadn't been spotted again, despite round-the-clock surveillance, and public pressure was mounting. "We're expanding the search radius again," she announced during the morning briefing. "And the governor has authorized National Guard support starting tomorrow." I listened with half an ear, my mind on the coming night. According to Thomas, the ritual to reseal the gateway had to be performed at midnight when the moon was at its zenith. Michael and the elders would handle the ceremony, but I was needed to guide them to the cave entrance, the same cave now heavily guarded by armed park rangers and FBI agents. As the briefing concluded, I approached Martinez. "I need to be on the night patrol in Zone 3, I said, naming the area containing the cave entrance. He eyed me suspiciously. "That area is restricted to tactical teams only now." Reynolds' orders. "I'm the only one who's seen the creature up close," I argued, "and I know that terrain better than anyone." After some persuasion, he reluctantly agreed to add me to the night patrol roster. One obstacle overcome, but many remained. The day passed with excruciating slowness. I tried to rest, knowing the night ahead would demand all my strength and focus. But sleep eluded me. Instead, I found myself drawn to my grandmother's journal again, searching for anything that might help us understand what we were facing. In a section near the back, I found a passage I'd overlooked before. "The Ancient Ones stand between worlds, guarding the thresholds where realms meet. They are neither good nor evil as we understand such concepts. They simply maintain the boundaries. When the boundaries weaken, they grow restless. When the boundaries break, they walk among us." A chill ran through me as I read those words. The boundaries were breaking, and tonight we would try to repair them. Dusk fell. I reported for night patrol duty, meeting the tactical team at the staging area. We were issued night vision equipment, sidearms, and tranquilizer rifles loaded with darts containing enough sedative to bring down a grizzly bear. "Shoot to sedate, not kill," the team leader instructed. "The university wants this specimen alive." The very thought made me uneasy. The tall ones weren't specimens to be studied. They were ancient guardians with intelligence and purpose. Our patrol route took us along the rim of the western canyon, then down a maintenance trail to the area where we'd encountered the creature. Two other teams covered adjacent zones, creating a perimeter around the entire region. As we descended into the canyon, I felt the weight of the night pressing down. The moon was nearly full, casting sharp shadows across the red rock landscape. By midnight, it would be directly overhead, the solstice moon Thomas had spoken of. We reached our assigned position by 10 p.m., a ridge overlooking the narrow slot canyon leading to the cave. From here we could observe the approach while remaining concealed. The tactical team spread out, establishing a watchful perimeter, while I positioned myself where I could see both the canyon and the rendezvous point where Michael would appear. At 11:15 p.m., I caught the signal, 3 quick flashes of light from the rim above. Michael and Thomas had arrived. Now I needed to create a diversion to draw the tactical team away from the cave entrance. My opportunity came at 11:30, when the radio crackled with reports of movement on the eastern perimeter. 2 team members were dispatched to investigate, leaving just 3 of us on the ridge. "I'm going to check the lower approach," I told the team leader, indicating a path that would take me near the rendezvous point. "Better visibility from there." He nodded, his attention focused on the reports coming through the radio. I moved quickly down the slope, using the shadows for cover until I reached the spot where Michael and Thomas waited with the sacred objects. "The cave is guarded," I whispered. 3 armed agents on the ridge above, more in the surrounding areas. Thomas seemed unconcerned. "The Guardians will help us," he said with quiet certainty. "We must proceed before midnight." We began our approach, staying low and using the terrain for concealment. The three objects were wrapped in ceremonial cloths, carried reverently by Thomas. As we neared the narrow entrance to the Slot Canyon, I hesitated. This was the most exposed part of our route, clearly visible from the ridge where the tactical team watched. But as we paused, a sound echoed through the canyon, that now familiar rumbling vocalization, but from the opposite direction. The tactical team immediately responded, their radio chatter indicating they were moving to investigate. "The Guardians," Thomas nodded. "They are clearing our path." We moved quickly through the Slot Canyon, reaching the circular chamber with its spring and the narrow cave entrance. The area was deserted. The diversion had worked perfectly. Thomas immediately began preparing for the ritual, arranging the three objects in a specific pattern before the cave entrance. Michael assisted, lighting small bundles of herbs and placing them strategically around the arrangement. "What happens now?" I asked, keeping watch for any sign of the tactical team returning. "We close the gateway," Thomas replied simply, "and hope it's not too late." He began to chant in a language I didn't recognize, older than Cherokee, older perhaps than any recorded human tongue. The words seemed to hang in the air, vibrating with power. Michael joined in, creating a harmony that echoed off the canyon walls. As midnight approached, the air in the chamber changed, grew heavier, charged with energy. The moonlight reached the cave entrance, illuminating the sacred objects with silver light. Thomas's chanting intensified, his weathered hands moving in intricate patterns over the arrangement. Then we heard it, movement from within the cave. Something large was approaching the entrance. I tensed, my hand moving instinctively to my sidearm, but Thomas never paused in his chanting. Michael gave me a warning look, shaking his head slightly. From the darkness of the cave emerged one of the tall ones, massive, powerful, its red-brown fur gleaming in the moonlight. It regarded us with those intelligent eyes, making no move to attack. Behind it I sensed rather than saw movement, more shapes in the darkness. Thomas continued the ritual, now addressing the Guardian directly. He gestured to the sacred objects, then to the cave entrance. The creature watched, utterly still, its gaze unreadable. Then, with deliberate movements, it approached the arrangement. Thomas stepped back, still chanting but now in a softer tone. The Guardian extended one massive hand toward the stone tablet, tracing the symbols with a gentleness that belied its enormous strength. A low vocalization rumbled from deep in its chest, then was answered by other voices from within the cave. A conversation we couldn't understand, but whose importance we could feel. The Guardian looked directly at me, its gaze intense. For a moment I felt something brush against my mind, a presence, ancient and vast, trying to communicate without words. Images flashed through my consciousness, the canyon as it was thousands of years ago, beings moving between our world and somewhere else. A great cataclysm, the sealing of passages, guardians appointed to watch the thresholds. Then the connection broke as the creature turned away. With surprising delicacy, it rearranged the sacred objects slightly, adjusting their positions with evident purpose. Thomas watched carefully, then resumed his chanting, incorporating the changes into the ritual. The moonlight reached its zenith, bathing the entire chamber in silver radiance. The Guardian stepped back toward the cave entrance, joining others of its kind now visible as silhouettes in the darkness. Thomas reached the crescendo of the ritual, his voice rising in a final invocation. Then the moonlight seemed to concentrate on the arranged objects, growing unnaturally bright. The air shimmered around the cave entrance, and for a brief moment I thought I glimpsed something beyond the darkness, a vast landscape unlike anything on Earth, with strange structures and unfamiliar stars. The Guardian raised both massive arms, its own voice joining the chant in a deep, resonant tone that vibrated through the rock itself. The other tall ones did the same, creating a harmonic that seemed to bend reality around us. With a sound like thunder contained in a small space, a shock wave of energy pulsed outward from the cave entrance. I was thrown backward, landing hard on the sandy ground. Michael and Thomas were similarly displaced, though the sacred objects remained undisturbed. When my vision cleared, I saw that the cave entrance had changed. Where before there had been darkness, now there was solid rock, as if the passage had never existed at all. The Guardians were gone, sealed away with the gateway they protected. Thomas slowly got to his feet, his expression solemn but satisfied. "It is done," he said simply. "The boundary is restored." Michael helped me up, his face showing the same mixture of relief and wonder I felt. "They accepted our offering," he said. "The debt is paid." We heard voices and saw flashlight beams approaching, the tactical team returning. We needed to leave immediately. What about the missing hikers? I asked as we gathered our things. Are they? Thomas's expression was grave. Some debts cannot be undone. Some prices must be paid. We slipped away before the tactical team arrived, using the same route we'd come in. By dawn, Thomas and Michael had returned to the reservation, while I reported for my regular shift as if nothing had happened. The official search for the missing hikers continued for another week before being scaled back. No trace of them was ever found, despite the most extensive search operation in the park's history. The creature, officially classified as an unidentified large predator, was never spotted again. Chamberlain offered a substantial reward for the return of his stolen artifacts, but they had been consumed in the sealing ritual, leaving nothing to find. Slowly, life in the park returned to normal. Tourists resumed their visits, rangers returned to routine patrols, and the incidents faded into local legend, another mysterious chapter in the canyon's long history. But I knew the truth. I had seen the Guardians, had glimpsed the world beyond the gateway, had felt the ancient power that dwelled in the depths of the canyon, and sometimes, when I patrol the western reaches near dusk, I still feel watched by unseen eyes. I still hear, or perhaps imagine, that deep rumbling vocalization echoing from distant shadows. The boundary is sealed again, but the Guardians remain vigilant, and so do I. 1 year later, I stand at the edge of the south rim, watching the sunrise paint the canyon in shades of fire. The tourists around me murmur appreciatively, snapping photos and pointing at particularly dramatic formations. None of them see what I see, the hidden places where worlds touch, the shadows where ancient beings once walked. None of them know how close the boundary came to breaking completely. After the sealing ritual, I considered leaving my ranger position. The weight of what I'd experienced, of what I now knew, made routine park duties seem trivial by comparison. But something held me here, a responsibility. A connection. Reynolds was reassigned to Yellowstone 3 months after the incident, her failure to resolve the missing persons cases a black mark on her otherwise impeccable record. Martinez took over as chief ranger, bringing a more pragmatic approach to park management. Sometimes the canyon keeps its secrets, he told me once, when we were alone at the station. Been that way since before the first European ever laid eyes on this place. Some things aren't meant to be explained. I wondered how much he really knew, how much he suspected. But we never spoke directly about what had happened in those dark days a year ago. Michael remained my connection to the indigenous perspective on the events. We met regularly, sometimes just to talk, other times to hike to remote areas of the canyon where the modern world seemed far away. The elders say the boundaries are holding, he told me during our most recent meeting. The dreams have stopped, the omens have faded. The dreams had affected many on the reservation in the days before the disappearances began. Nightmares of tall, shadowy figures moving through the canyon, calling in voices that echoed in the dreamers' minds long after waking. And walking elk? I asked. Has anyone else seen him? Michael shook his head. Not since you. But that's how it often is with spirit guides. They appear when needed, then return to the other side. I never told him about the dreams I still had occasionally. Dreams of standing at the sealed cave entrance, feeling something massive and ancient moving just beyond the rock, watching and waiting. In these dreams, walking elk often appeared, his expression solemn as he whispered warnings I couldn't quite hear upon waking. Were they just dreams? Or something more? I chose not to dwell on the question too deeply. The official investigation into the disappearances eventually went cold. 8 people in total, their files still open, still officially missing rather than declared dead. Their families still visited the park occasionally, placing flowers at a memorial plaque installed near the visitor center. I always made a point to speak with them when they came, to listen to their stories, their grief, their unanswered questions. I couldn't give them the truth, but I could give them my attention, my respect. And in private moments at dusk when the canyon shadows deepened, I would make my way to special places Michael had shown me, places where the boundary between worlds grew thin at certain times. There, I would leave small offerings, cornmeal, tobacco, words of acknowledgement, to honor the guardians who watched from beyond the veil. Call it superstition if you want. I call it respect. 6 months after the sealing, a research team from the university attempted to locate the cave we had described in our reports. They found nothing, no opening, no passage, not even evidence that such a cave had ever existed. The slot canyon ended in a solid rock wall, with no sign of the circular chamber or spring we had documented. Faulty GPS coordinates, their report concluded. Inaccurate landmark identification. I knew better, but kept my silence. Some truths aren't meant for scientific papers or official reports. Chamberlain never recovered his stolen artifacts. His break-in remained unsolved, though the insurance company eventually paid his claim after a lengthy investigation. He sold his Sedona estate 6 months later and moved to Switzerland. His interest in indigenous artifacts apparently dimmed. Dr. Gray published a paper speculating on the existence of an undocumented large predator in the Grand Canyon region, possibly a relic population of some prehistoric species. It was largely dismissed by her peers, her career suffering a setback from which it never fully recovered. I sent her an anonymous message after reading the paper. Some truths can only be witnessed, not proven. I don't know if she understood. Life moved on. The canyon endured. The boundary held. But I remained vigilant, watching for signs. Unusual animal behavior, strange weather patterns, visitors reporting odd experiences or sounds. The kind of subtle warnings that might indicate the gateway was weakening again. Thomas had taught me what to look for, how to read the canyon's moods and messages. "You have the blood of seers in your veins," he told me during one of our meetings. "The gift of seeing beyond the veil. Use it wisely." I took his teachings seriously, incorporating ancient knowledge into my modern role as a park ranger. A foot in both worlds, just like my Cherokee ancestors had been. Tonight marks the anniversary of the sealing ritual. A full moon again, though not the solstice moon that had provided the power for the ceremony. Still, a potent time when the veil might thin slightly. I've requested the night shift in the western section, citing a need to monitor unusual wildlife activity. Martinez approved without question, another sign that he perhaps understands more than he admits. As darkness falls, I make my way to the sealed cave site. No tactical teams patrol here anymore. Budget cuts and the absence of incidents have returned this area to routine ranger oversight. I'm alone with the canyon and my memories. The Slot Canyon is exactly as I remember it, the narrow walls rising on either side like ancient sentinels. But when I reach the place where the circular chamber should be, I find only a solid rock wall, smooth, unbroken, with no sign of the spring or cave entrance. Reality has been rewritten, the physical world adjusted to accommodate the sealing of the gateway. I settle on a flat rock, unwrapping the small bundle I've brought: cornmeal, tobacco, a few strands of my own hair, the offerings Thomas taught me to prepare. As the moon rises above the canyon rim, I arrange them in the pattern he showed me, speaking the words of acknowledgement in Cherokee. I honor the guardians of the boundary. I respect the ancient agreement. I remember what was and what might have been. The canyon is silent around me, but it's a listening silence, an aware silence. I feel the weight of unseen eyes, the presence of something vast and patient beyond normal perception. After completing the ritual, I sit quietly, letting the canyon's night sounds wash over me. The occasional cry of a hunting owl, the rustle of small nocturnal creatures, the whisper of wind through juniper branches. Then I hear it, faint but unmistakable, that deep rumbling vocalization echoing from somewhere that isn't quite here. Not threatening, but acknowledging, a reminder that the guardians still watch, still protect, still remember. I smile into the darkness. "I remember too," I say quietly, and I remain vigilant. As if in response, a warm breeze stirs the canyon, carrying the scent of juniper and sage. For just a moment, I think I see Walking Elk standing on a ledge above me, his weathered face serene in the moonlight. He raises a hand in greeting, or perhaps blessing, then fades into the shadows, spirit guide or hallucination. It doesn't really matter. The message remains the same. The boundary must be respected. The guardians must be honored. The ancient pact must be maintained, and as long as I wear the ranger badge in this canyon, I will ensure that it is. The moon climbs higher, bathing the red rocks in silver light. In this illumination, the canyon reveals its true nature, not just a geological wonder, but a living entity with secrets and powers beyond human understanding. A place where worlds touch, where boundaries blur, where ancient beings still walk when darkness falls. Most visitors see only the surface beauty, the dramatic vistas, the layered colors, the immense scale. They come, they photograph, they leave, never knowing what depths lie beneath their feet, what powers watch from the shadows. But some of us know, some of us remember, some of us keep the old ways alive through small rituals and quiet acknowledgments, not out of fear but out of respect for forces that existed long before humans walked this land and will remain long after we are gone. I gather my things as midnight approaches, preparing to return to the ranger station. My radio crackles occasionally with routine check-ins from other patrols, normal, mundane reminders of the world I officially inhabit. As I rise to leave, I notice something on the ground nearby that wasn't there before. A single track in the sandy soil. Enormous, with 5 distinct toe impressions pressed deep as if by great weight. A message, a reminder, a connection. I place my own boot beside it for scale, marveling at the difference. Then I carefully obliterate both prints, erasing evidence that others might misinterpret or exploit. Some secrets belong to the canyon alone. Walking back toward my vehicle, I feel a profound sense of peace despite the weight of knowledge I carry. I am part of something ancient and ongoing, a human link in a chain of guardianship that stretches back thousands of years. My grandmother would be proud, I think. Her stories and teachings weren't just cultural heritage to be preserved, they were practical knowledge for navigating the hidden realities of the world. Preparation for a role I never expected to assume. The night sky above the canyon blazes with stars, the Milky Way a luminous river across the darkness. I pause to look up, feeling simultaneously insignificant and connected to something vast and eternal. Until next time, I whisper to the watching canyon, to the guardians beyond the veil, to whatever ancient powers might be listening in the darkness. The breeze stirs again, carrying what might be a response, or might simply be the wind's passage through stone corridors shaped by water and time. Either way, I understand my role now. Park ranger by day, guardian of boundaries by night. A foot in both worlds, just as it should be, just as it has always been for those with eyes to see and ears to hear the deeper truths of this ancient land. The canyon keeps its secrets, and so do I. My name is Tom Riley, and this happened to me in 2008 in the remote wilderness of the Chequamegon National Forest, Wisconsin. I've worked as a park ranger for over 10 years now, but I've never had anything close to this. You know the stories, those rumors about things in the woods, whispered from ranger to ranger. But you never really believe them until you're the one looking over your shoulder wondering what's out there. It started when I was assigned to a night patrol alone. We were short-staffed that year, and with the wildfire season finally winding down, the administration needed someone to take a look at the perimeter. Budget cuts had hit us hard, and by October half our seasonal staff had already departed for the winter. The remaining rangers were stretched thin across nearly 1 million acres of wilderness. Riley, Supervisor Granger had said, tossing me the keys to the patrol vehicle. Need you to check the eastern boundary tonight. Some hikers reported smoke near the old logging road. I caught the keys mid-air. Probably just some campers who didn't properly extinguish their fire. Granger's eyes crinkled at the corners, the only indication of emotion on his weathered face. Maybe, but after the Cedar Creek blaze, we can't take chances. I nodded, remembering the devastating fire that had consumed nearly 4,000 acres the previous summer. The damage was still visible in certain parts of the forest, blackened stumps standing like gravestones among the new growth. I'll head out around sunset, I said, pocketing the keys. Should be back before midnight. Granger nodded, turning back to his paperwork. Radio check every hour. And Riley. He looked up, his expression unreadable. Stay on the roads. That area gets tricky after dark. I didn't think much of it at the time. Warnings like that were standard protocol. The Chequamegon was notorious for its dense undergrowth and disorienting terrain. Even experienced rangers had been known to lose their bearings. As the day wore on, a strange heaviness settled in the air. The October sky remained clear, but there was a stillness that felt unnatural, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The wildlife seemed to sense it too. No birdsong accompanied my preparations, no squirrels darted across the compound. Just silence, broken only by the metallic clicks as I checked my gear. Flashlight, first aid kit, radio, sidearm. I rarely carried my service weapon on routine patrols, but something about Granger's warning and the unusual quiet made me strap the Glock to my hip. A precaution, nothing more. In 10 years of service, I'd never had to draw it for anything more threatening than the occasional aggressive black bear. By the time I climbed into the Forest Service truck, the sun was already sinking below the tree line, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples. The temperature had dropped considerably and my breath fogged the windshield as I started the engine. The radio crackled with static as I called in my departure. Ranger Riley heading out to eastern boundary. Over. Copy that, Riley, came the response, broken by intermittent static. Remember your hourly check-ins. Over. The drive started uneventfully enough. The logging road cut through the dense forest like a scar, rutted and rough beneath the truck's tires. I'd traveled this route dozens of times, knew every bend and dip like the lines on my own palm, but as daylight faded entirely, replaced by the pale glow of a nearly full moon, the familiar landscape began to transform. It wasn't unusual. In fact, I was used to the isolation. But the atmosphere that evening, the weight of silence in the air, It felt off. I drove out to the edge of the forest. The dark, towering trees stood like silent sentinels. The sky was clear, but there was something wrong with the way the moonlight barely pierced through the branches. The pines loomed taller somehow, their shadows stretching across the road like grasping fingers. The moonlight filtering through the canopy created patterns that shifted and moved, playing tricks on my peripheral vision. More than once, I found myself jerking the wheel, convinced I'd seen something dart across the road, only to find nothing there. It wasn't normal. I made my rounds along the old logging roads, checked the equipment, took the usual notes, but every movement seemed magnified in the stillness. I recorded the locations of the remote weather stations, checked for signs of illegal camping or hunting, marked areas where fallen trees might need clearing. All standard procedure, yet each task felt weighted with an inexplicable significance. The two-way radio remained stubbornly silent except for my hourly check-ins, each one answered with increasing brevity from the station. By the third call, I received only a terse copy in response. The poor reception wasn't unusual in the deeper parts of the forest, where the thick canopy and rolling terrain created natural dead zones. Still, the crackling static between transmissions seemed to contain whispers just below the threshold of hearing. I parked the truck by the old ranger cabin for a quick break. It had been a while since I'd been out there, but everything seemed untouched, like time had stopped. The small log structure had once served as an outpost for fire spotters, but had been largely abandoned after the construction of the modern fire towers. Now it was used mainly for storage and emergency shelter. The cabin's windows were dark, the padlock on the door exactly as it should be. I sat on the hood of the truck, thermos of coffee in hand, and tried to shake the feeling of unease that had settled between my shoulder blades. The forest stretched in every direction, a sea of darkness broken only by the occasional glimmer of moonlight on leaf or needle. That's when I heard it. A rustle. Something light, something soft, but unmistakably human, or something else. My gut twisted. It was too quiet for any animal, and no one else should have been around. I grabbed my flashlight and gun, checked the truck doors again. No one in sight. The wind had picked up a little, the branches swaying more than they should have, creaking, but I wasn't taking any chances. The sound had come from behind the cabin, a deliberate movement through the underbrush. Too controlled to be the random scurrying of a nocturnal creature. Too purposeful to be dismissed as wind through the trees. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding thin and hollow in the vast silence. "Forest Service, identify yourself." No response. Just another soft rustle, this time from a slightly different location, as if whatever had made the sound had shifted position. I unholstered my weapon, keeping it pointed at the ground as I swept the area with my flashlight. "This is Ranger Riley with the U.S. Forest Service." I tried again, my voice steadier now. "If you're camping here, you need to know this area is restricted." Still nothing. But the feeling of being watched intensified, crawling up my spine like ice water. I keyed my radio, trying to reach the station, but received only an angry burst of static in return. I was on my own. I should have gotten back in the truck and left. That would have been the protocol. Report suspicious activity, maintain a safe distance, wait for backup. But 10 years of routine patrols had bred a certain complacency, and beneath the apprehension lurked a dangerous curiosity. Besides, I told myself, it was probably just an illegal camper, someone who'd rather avoid a citation than come forward. Or maybe a poacher, equally motivated to remain unseen. Either way, it was my job to investigate. I approached the edge of the clearing where the cabin stood. Flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches interlacing overhead to block out the moon. Each step took me further from the relative safety of the truck, deeper into the waiting woods. The rustling had stopped, but something else had taken its place. A tension in the air, a presence that seemed to pulse among the trees. I swept the flashlight back and forth, illuminating nothing but trunks and underbrush, but I couldn't shake the certainty that something was there just beyond the reach of the light. Watching, waiting. I took another step forward, and the forest seemed to exhale around me. A cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it a scent I couldn't immediately identify. Something earthy but wrong, like decaying leaves mixed with a chemical tang that burned the back of my throat. That's when my radio crackled to life, making me jump. Through the static, I could barely make out Granger's voice, tense and urgent. "Riley, report your position." "Over." I fumbled with the radio, eyes still scanning the tree line. "Eastern boundary, near the old cabin. Possible intruder in the area." "Over." The static grew louder, Granger's response breaking up into unintelligible fragments. "Back to." "Immediately." "Don't." "Alone." "Say again, base." you're breaking up. Over." I waited, but the radio had gone dead in my hand, and that's when I saw it. Just at the edge of my flashlight beam, a shadow that didn't match the trees around it. A darker patch of darkness, roughly human in shape but somehow wrong in its proportions. It moved slightly, and I could have sworn I saw the gleam of eyes reflecting the light. In that moment, standing at the threshold between the clearing and the forest, I faced a choice that would change everything that followed. I could retreat to the truck, lock the doors, and wait until daylight or backup arrived. That would have been the smart choice, the safe choice. Instead, I took a step forward, into the waiting dark. I followed the noise off the beaten path, deeper into the forest. The beam of my flashlight carved a tunnel through the darkness, but it felt pitifully inadequate against the vast blackness that pressed in from all sides. Each step took me further from the relative safety of the cabin and the truck, down a game trail barely visible among the underbrush. I couldn't explain it at the time, but the woods felt too alive. Not in the way a healthy forest teems with life. The rustling of small creatures, the whisper of wind through leaves, the distant calls of nocturnal birds. This was different. The forest seemed to pulse with a malevolent awareness, as if the trees themselves were silently communicating my presence to something waiting deeper in the woods. The air smelled wrong, earthy, damp, but with an undertone of something almost chemical. It reminded me of the antiseptic smell of hospital corridors, but corrupted somehow, mixed with the scent of rotting vegetation and something else I couldn't identify. Something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. My boots crunched through the leaf litter, each step echoing in the unnatural quiet. I tried to move silently, but the forest floor betrayed me, dry leaves and fallen twigs snapping underfoot like gunshots in the stillness. My training told me to announce my presence again, to identify myself as a ranger, but some primal instinct kept me silent. Whatever was out there, I no longer wanted to draw its attention. The trail narrowed, forcing me to turn sideways to squeeze between close-growing trunks. The trees here were old, their bark deeply furrowed and covered with lichen that glowed faintly phosphorescent in the beam of my flashlight. I didn't recognize the species, which was troubling, given my decade of experience in these woods. They seemed almost deliberately placed, growing too close together, their branches intertwining overhead to form a canopy so dense that not even moonlight penetrated. I checked my compass, trying to orient myself, but the needle spun uselessly, unable to find north. My GPS watch displayed only an error message. I was beginning to understand why this part of the forest had such a reputation among the senior rangers. The disorientation was physical, not just psychological. And then, from somewhere ahead, came the unmistakable sound of breathing. Not human, though. Too deep, too thick, like something struggling to catch its breath. I froze, finger hovering near the trigger of my sidearm. The breathing continued, a wet, labored sound that seemed to come from something with damaged lungs. It was there, behind the trees, just out of sight. I could hear its feet shifting in the underbrush, heavy, labored. It was too big to be a bear, too quick, too deliberate. My training kicked in, and I mentally cataloged the indigenous wildlife. Black bears were common, but they rarely approached humans unless startled or protecting cubs. Wolves had been reintroduced to the area, but they hunted in packs and generally avoided human contact. Mountain lions were extremely rare but not unheard of. None of these matched what I was hearing, and whatever it was circling me. I didn't waste time thinking. I backed away slowly, trying to keep my flashlight steady, my heart pounding in my chest. The beam caught something moving between the trees to my left. Just a flash of pale skin, quickly gone. I swung the light in that direction, but there was nothing there. Then movement to my right. Again, just a glimpse. Something tall, bipedal, ducking behind a massive pine trunk. I pivoted, keeping my back to a large tree, trying to cover all approaches. The breathing had stopped, replaced by a silence so complete it seemed to have physical weight. "Forest Service," I called out, my voice sounding thin and ineffectual. "Identify yourself immediately." My only answer was a soft, deliberate footfall directly behind me. I spun around, and that's when I saw it. Just a flicker of movement, a dark shape just beyond the beam of light. I swung the flashlight around, and there it was, a face. Hollow eyes, no visible pupils, just pits of black framed by something resembling a mask made of skin. The rest of its body was obscured by the shadows, but I could see its shape, tall, bipedal, with limbs that didn't quite fit any animal I'd ever encountered. In the stark white beam of my tactical flashlight, I could see details I would later wish I hadn't. The skin, if it was skin, had a waxy, translucent quality, stretched too tight over a frame that seemed both emaciated and powerful. Where a human would have had a nose, it had only a ragged hole, the edges crusted with something dark. Its mouth was a lipless gash, revealing teeth that were too numerous, too sharp, too similar to human teeth but wrong in their arrangement. It was like a twisted version of something human but wrong. It shouldn't have been real. I should have run right there, but I froze. We locked eyes, or rather, I stared into those hollow sockets while it studied me with whatever sensory organs it possessed. Time stretched, seconds expanding into what felt like hours. Neither of us moved. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, feel cold sweat trickling down my spine. Then, in one fluid motion, it charged. The creature moved with a speed that belied its awkward appearance, covering the distance between us before I could raise my weapon. The impact sent me flying backward, my flashlight spinning away into the underbrush, plunging the scene into darkness broken only by fragments of moonlight filtering through the canopy. I barely had time to react before its claws dug into my shoulder, pinning me to the ground. I screamed, but no one could hear me out here. The pain was immediate and intense, like having white-hot metal driven through muscle and bone. I could feel warm blood soaking through my uniform shirt, smell the coppery tang of it, mixing with that strange chemical odor that surrounded the creature. I fought back, groping blindly until my hand closed around a fallen branch. I swung it with all my strength, feeling it connect with something solid. The creature recoiled slightly, just enough for me to scramble backward, my boots slipping in the leaf litter as I tried to gain purchase. In the dim light, I could see it crouching a few feet away, those hollow eye sockets fixed on me. It made no sound, no growl of pain from my blow, no snarl of aggression, just that awful guttural breathing, like something drowning in its own fluids. My hand found a rock, smooth and heavy, about the size of a softball. I gripped it tightly, knowing it was a pitiful weapon against whatever this thing was, but desperate for any advantage. The creature tilted its head slightly, an eerily human gesture that made my skin crawl. "Stay back," I warned, my voice hoarse with pain and fear. "I'm a federal officer." The absurdity of identifying myself to this thing struck me even as the words left my mouth. Whatever it was, it existed outside the jurisdictions and authorities of human society. My badge, my uniform, my official status, none of it meant anything here in the dark heart of the forest. The creature straightened slightly, rising to its full height. It must have been 7 feet tall at least, its limbs too long, joints bending in ways that human anatomy wouldn't allow. In the fragments of moonlight, I could see more details of its body. The rib cage pressing against that translucent skin, the 2 long fingers ending in curved claws that dripped with my blood. I backed away slowly, feeling behind me for a path of escape. My fingers brushed against something metallic, my flashlight. I grabbed it, switching it on with trembling fingers. The beam illuminated the creature fully for the first time, and I almost wished it hadn't. What I had taken for a face was actually something more like a hood or cowl, a flap of skin that extended from its skull and could be drawn back to reveal what lay beneath. And now it was peeling back, that skin retracting like a hideous curtain to expose a mass of writhing appendages where a face should be, thin, tentacle-like structures that quivered and reached toward me, each tipped with what looked like a tiny mouth. My vision blurred with pain and revulsion. I swung the rock with all my strength, connecting with the side of the creature's head. It staggered slightly, those appendages whipping frantically. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the searing pain in my shoulder, and ran. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches reaching out to snag my clothing, roots rising up to trip my feet. I crashed through the underbrush, directionless, driven only by the need to put distance between myself and that thing. Behind me, I could hear it pursuing, not crashing through the vegetation as I was, but moving with a terrible grace, like it knew every tree, every obstacle. I risked a glance over my shoulder and immediately regretted it. The creature was flowing through the forest like smoke, its movements fluid and purposeful. It was gaining on me, those long limbs eating up the distance between us with each stride. My foot caught on an exposed root, and I went down hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs. I rolled onto my back, raising my arms in a futile attempt to protect myself as the creature loomed over me. Its claws dug into my calf, piercing through muscle to scrape against bone. I screamed again, the sound tearing from my throat like something solid. The pain was blinding, overwhelming. I kicked out with my free leg, connecting with nothing but air. The struggle was pure chaos. It was so strong, inhumanly powerful. I could feel its claws raking into my flesh, tearing through my uniform, leaving deep furrows in my side, my arms, anywhere it could reach. It was pulling me, dragging me toward the deeper forest, toward some destination I couldn't see but instinctively dreaded. My hand closed around the grip of my sidearm, still holstered at my hip. With fingers slick with my own blood, I drew the Glock and fired blindly upward. The muzzle flash illuminated the creature for a split second, those writhing face tentacles recoiling from the light and noise. I couldn't tell if I'd hit it, but the gunshot had an effect. It released its grip on my leg, recoiling slightly. I fired again, and again, each shot deafeningly loud in the confined space of the forest. The creature retreated further with each report, those hollow eye sockets fixed on me, watching. I kept firing until the slide locked back, the magazine empty. My vision was going black around the edges, consciousness slipping away as blood loss and shock took their toll. I couldn't breathe through the pain. The forest swam around me, trees blurring together, the ground seeming to tilt beneath my prone body. Then, just as quickly as it had attacked, it released me and disappeared into the trees, leaving me bleeding on the ground. For a moment I lay there, uncertain if the creature was truly gone or merely waiting nearby. The forest had fallen silent again, that oppressive quiet broken only by my ragged breathing and the faint rustle of leaves in the night breeze. I strained to hear any sign of the creature's return, but there was nothing, not even the normal sounds of nocturnal wildlife that should have filled the woods. I was barely conscious, but I knew I had to move. Every instinct screamed that the creature might return, that I was vulnerable here, bleeding and weak. With tremendous effort, I rolled onto my stomach, then pushed myself to my hands and knees. The world spun sickeningly and I nearly collapsed again. One step at a time, I told myself. Find the trail. Find the truck. Radio for help. I couldn't stand, so I began to crawl, dragging my injured leg behind me. The pain was excruciating, but fear drove me forward, inch by agonizing inch. I had dropped my flashlight during the attack, so I navigated by the faint moonlight that managed to penetrate the canopy. Time became meaningless. I might have crawled for minutes or hours, stopping frequently to rest, fighting against the darkness that threatened to engulf my consciousness. Somehow, I found the game trail again, and from there, managed to orient myself toward the cabin and the truck. When the clearing finally came into view, I could have wept with relief. The truck sat where I had left it, a solid, human-made object in a wilderness that suddenly seemed alien and hostile. I dragged myself the final distance, leaving a trail of blood across the dirt and gravel. With the last of my strength, I pulled myself into the driver's seat, collapsing against the steering wheel. My hands shook violently as I tried to insert the key into the ignition, dropping it twice before finally succeeding. The engine roared to life, and I threw the truck into reverse, desperate to put distance between myself and this place. The radio crackled as I sped down the logging road, tires throwing up dirt and gravel. I reached for it with a blood-slick hand. "Base, this is Riley," I croaked. "Emergency. I'm hurt. Something attacked me." Static answered me, broken by fragments of a voice I couldn't make out. I tried again, pressing the transmit button with fingers that felt numb and distant. "Need medical." Heading toward the main road, more static, then finally a clear transmission. "Riley, what's your location? What happened?" But I couldn't answer. The words wouldn't form. Instead, all I could manage to say was, "It's real. It's real." The truck swerved as my vision dimmed, consciousness slipping away despite my desperate efforts to remain awake. The last thing I remember is the headlights illuminating the main road ahead, and then nothing but darkness. I don't remember much of the next few hours. Fragmented images, sensations, voices fading in and out like a badly tuned radio. The jolt of the truck hitting something, a tree, a guardrail, I never found out. The cold night air on my face as someone pulled me from the wreckage, hands pressing against my wounds, voices shouting for medics, for bandages, for blood. I remember the helicopter ride, the rhythmic thump of the rotors vibrating through my broken body as the medical team worked frantically to keep me alive. I drifted in and out of consciousness, each return bringing a fresh wave of pain that threatened to drag me back under. "Stay with us, Riley," a voice urged, a face swimming in and out of focus above me. "You're going to be okay." I tried to tell them about the creature, about its hollow eyes and reaching claws, but the words wouldn't come. Only a hoarse whisper, "Not human, not animal, it's out there." They thought I was delirious, and maybe I was. But the memory of those empty eye sockets, that skin mask peeling back to reveal the writhing horror beneath, that was no hallucination. I woke up in the hospital. The doctor said it was a miracle I'd made it out alive. My wounds were deep, my shoulder, my legs, even my side. The damage was extensive, a shattered collarbone, deep lacerations across my torso and limbs, significant blood loss. and a concussion from when my truck had veered off the road. You're lucky to be alive, Dr. Peterson told me during her morning rounds, 3 days after I'd been brought in. Whatever attacked you nearly severed your brachial artery. Another few minutes and you would have bled out. I watched her check my IV, adjust the monitors beside my bed. She was middle-aged, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that I found reassuring. What was it, she asked, examining the deep furrows across my shoulder. Bear? Wolverine? I hesitated. How could I explain what I'd seen? Who would believe me? I'm not sure, I said finally. It was dark. It happened fast. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses, clearly not buying it. These wounds are unusual, Ranger Riley. The spacing of the claws, I suppose, doesn't match any predator indigenous to this region. I told you I didn't get a good look at it. You emptied your service weapon, she reminded me. All 15 rounds. That suggests you saw something clearly enough to aim at. I turned away, staring out the window at the gray October sky. I fired blindly, just trying to scare it off. Dr. Peterson sighed, making a note in my chart. Well, whatever it was, you'll need to take it easy for a while. The lacerations will heal, but you've lost a lot of blood, and those tendons in your shoulder will need time to repair themselves. I nodded absently, not really listening. My mind was still in those woods, still seeing that face, or what passed for a face, peeling back to reveal the horror beneath. The days passed slowly in the hospital. Granger visited once, uncomfortable in the sterile environment, his ranger uniform looking out of place among the medical staff. Hell of a thing, Riley, he said, standing awkwardly at the foot of my bed. Hell of a thing. Did they find anything? I asked. At the scene? Any evidence? Granger shifted his weight, not meeting my eyes. We found your blood. A lot of it. And some unusual tracks, but the rain washed most of them away before the forensic team could make casts. What kind of tracks? Hard to say. Large. Bipedal. But distorted somehow. He cleared his throat. Listen, Riley, about your report. What about it? The description you gave of your attacker. It's problematic. I stared at him, anger rising despite my weakened state. Problematic? I told you what I saw. You told me you saw some kind of monster with a face full of tentacles, Granger said quietly. You understand how that sounds, right? Especially coming from an officer with an otherwise spotless record. I know what I saw, I insisted, my voice rising. A nurse glanced in through the doorway, eyebrows raised in concern. Granger held up his hands in a placating gesture. I'm not saying you're lying. Trauma, blood loss, fear, they can play tricks on the mind, make you see things that aren't there. This wasn't a hallucination. The official report will list your attacker as unknown predator, possibly bear, Granger continued as if I hadn't spoken. For your sake, Riley, you've got a pension to think about. I wanted to argue further, but exhaustion dragged at me, the pain medication making my thoughts sluggish and disconnected. Granger seemed to take my silence for agreement. Get some rest, he said, already moving toward the door. We'll talk more when you're recovered. But I knew there wouldn't be more talks. Granger's expression, the careful blend of concern and disbelief, told me everything I needed to know. In his mind and in the minds of my colleagues, I was already being recast. Tom Riley, the reliable ranger who cracked under pressure, who emptied his weapon at shadows, who came back with wild stories of monsters in the woods. The nights were the worst. In the quiet darkness of the hospital room, with only the rhythmic beeping of monitors for company, I would jerk awake from dreams of being hunted through endless forests. Of that creature always just behind me, those hollow eyes watching from every shadow. Sometimes, in the dreams, it would catch me, those writhing face tentacles wrapping around my throat, choking off my screams. Other times, I would be running endlessly, never escaping, never caught, trapped in a limbo of perpetual terror. I started asking the nurses to leave the lights on, claiming it was easier to navigate to the bathroom that way. They complied, but I could see the notes being made in my chart, the whispered consultations in the hallway. They thought I was suffering from PTSD, and maybe I was, but that didn't mean the creature wasn't real. A psychiatrist visited on my 5th day in the hospital, Dr. Levine, a soft-spoken man with a beard and gentle eyes. He asked me about the attack, about my dreams, about my history with the Forest Service. It's common for trauma victims to experience intrusive thoughts and nightmares, he explained, his voice careful and neutral. The mind's way of processing the event. I'm not crazy, I told him. I know what I saw. No one is suggesting you're crazy, Ranger Riley, but the human brain is remarkably adaptable. When faced with extreme stress and danger, it can fill in gaps, create narratives that help us make sense of chaotic experiences. I stared at him, too tired to argue. Have you ever been in the deep woods at night, doctor? Really deep, where even the moonlight doesn't penetrate. He hesitated, then shook his head. There are things out there that don't fit into your neat categories, I said. Things that shouldn't exist, but do. Dr. Levine made a note in his leather-bound notebook. Tell me about these things. But I had already said too much. I could see it in his eyes, that clinical interest, the way he was cataloging my responses, fitting them into diagnostic criteria. To him, I was just another patient, another case study in post-traumatic stress. I'm tired, I said, turning away. I'd like to rest now. He nodded, rising from his chair. Of course, we can continue our session tomorrow, but I knew I wouldn't be there tomorrow. As soon as he left, I began planning my departure. I couldn't stay in this hospital, couldn't keep repeating my story to doctors who saw me as delusional, to colleagues who thought I'd cracked under pressure. I needed to understand what had happened to me, and I wouldn't find those answers here. That night, after the final medication rounds, I disconnected my IV, dressed in the clothes Granger had brought during his visit, and slipped out of the hospital. My body protested every movement, pain flaring across my wounded shoulder and leg, but adrenaline kept me moving. The cool night air hit me like a physical blow as I emerged from the hospital's rear entrance. For a moment I stood frozen, suddenly aware of the darkness surrounding the building, the shadows that could conceal anything, or anyone. Then I forced myself forward, limping toward the taxi stand at the front of the hospital. Where to? The driver asked, eyeing my bandaged state with mild concern. I hesitated, then gave him the address of my cabin on the outskirts of Park Falls, about 20 miles from the hospital. It wasn't much, a one-room structure with basic amenities, but it was isolated, defensible, a place where I could think, plan my next steps. The taxi wound through the darkened streets, and I found myself pressing back against the seat, eyes scanning the roadside trees for any sign of movement. The rational part of my brain knew the creature was miles away, back in the depths of the Chicamagon. But fear isn't rational, and mine had become a constant companion, whispering that nowhere was truly safe. My cabin was cold and musty when I arrived, having sat empty for the days I'd been in the hospital. I paid the driver, then stood watching until the taillights of the taxi disappeared down the gravel road. Only then did I turn and face the dark outline of my home, surrounded by the deeper darkness of the forest beyond. Inside, I moved methodically, checking each room, each closet, under the bed, anywhere something could hide. I knew it was irrational, knew the creature couldn't possibly be here, but I couldn't help myself. Only when I was satisfied that I was alone did I allow myself to collapse onto the couch, exhaustion and pain overwhelming me. I didn't want to go back to that forest. I couldn't. I knew there was something out there, something that had been watching for longer than I realized. The park gave me time to recover, but I knew I couldn't stay there, not with the memory of those black eyes, those claws. As I drifted into an uneasy sleep, one thought circled in my mind. I needed answers. And the only place to find them was back in the history of the Chicamagon itself. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin windows and the insistent ringing of my cell phone. It was Granger, his voice tight with concern and irritation. "Riley, what the hell?" The hospital called. "Said you checked yourself out against medical advice." "I'm fine," I lied, wincing as I shifted position. The wounds across my shoulder and leg throbbed with dull, persistent pain. "I needed to be home." "You need to be under medical supervision," Granger insisted. "Those injuries are being taken care of," I interrupted. "Listen, I need some time to process everything." There was a pause, then Granger's voice softened slightly. "Take all the time you need, Riley. Your position will be waiting when you're ready." But even as he said it, I knew I wouldn't be going back. Not to patrol duties, not to the forest I'd once felt so at home in. Something fundamental had changed. In the woods, or in me. Perhaps both. "There's something else," I said, before he could hang up. "I need access to the archives. The old incident reports, specifically from the 70s. "The archives? What for?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Research. For my report." "Riley, we've been over this. The official report." "I know what the official report will say," I cut in. "This is for me. I need to understand what happened." Another pause, longer this time. Then a sigh. "Fine, I'll have Meredith pull the files you need. But Riley, this obsession isn't healthy. You were attacked by an animal. A rare, possibly unknown species, but an animal nonetheless. Not a monster." I didn't bother arguing. Let him believe what he needed to. "Thanks, Granger. I appreciate it." After hanging up, I forced myself through the painful process of changing my bandages. The wounds looked worse in the harsh bathroom light, Deep furrows across my shoulder and side, puncture marks on my calf where the creature's claws had dug in. They were clean, thankfully, showing no signs of infection, but they would leave significant scars, permanent reminders of what I'd encountered. Later that day, a junior ranger named Wilson delivered a box of files to my cabin. He was young, eager, clearly curious about the ranger who'd survived a mysterious attack, but too polite to ask direct questions. Supervisor Granger said to tell you these go back to 1965, he said, setting the box on my kitchen table. All incident reports involving unexplained occurrences, missing persons, or unusual animal encounters. Thanks, Wilson. He lingered in the doorway, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Is it true what they're saying, that you emptied your weapon into whatever attacked you and it still got away? I looked at him. So young, so confident in his uniform, his whole career ahead of him. Just like I had been, before that night. Be careful out there, Wilson, I said instead of answering. Especially after dark. His eyes widened slightly, but he nodded, offering a small salute before leaving. Through the window, I watched him drive away, his Forest Service truck kicking up dust along the gravel road. Another ranger, another guardian of the wilderness. I hoped he would never encounter what I had. I turned to the box of files, pulling out folder after folder of yellowed reports. Most were mundane: hikers lost and found, campers reporting strange noises that turned out to be owls or coyotes, the occasional poacher caught in restricted areas. But as I dug deeper, patterns began to emerge. It wasn't until I started looking into the area's history that I learned what it really was. The creature wasn't new to these woods. Not by a long shot. There were whispers, stories of hunters and campers disappearing over the years, going back at least 50 years. A report from 1968, 3 hunters failing to return from a weekend trip. Search parties found their camp intact, meals half-eaten, rifles still leaning against trees. No signs of struggle, no blood, no bodies. The official conclusion: the men had become disoriented and wandered into the deeper forest, succumbing to exposure. A ranger's log from 1971. Notes about unusual tracks found near the eastern boundary. Unlike any known species, the ranger had written, bipedal, approximately 14 inches in length, with what appear to be 6 digits. The report was accompanied by a crude sketch that made my blood run cold. The proportions were wrong for a human foot, the toes too long, too widely spaced, ending in what looked like hooked claws. And then I found it. The file I hadn't known I was looking for until it was in my hands. A park ranger by the name of Robert O'Malley went missing in 1973. His body never found. The report was thicker than the others, containing not just the official documentation but handwritten notes, personal correspondence, photographs. O'Malley had been a veteran ranger, well respected, with 15 years of service in the Chequamegon. On September 12, 1973, he had radioed in from the eastern boundary, the same area where I had been attacked, reporting unusual activity near one of the fire observation posts. Something moving around the perimeter. The transcript of his final transmission read, "Not human, not animal either. Request backup." No backup had been immediately available. By the time another ranger reached the area 3 hours later, O'Malley was gone. His vehicle was found parked near an old logging road, the driver's door open, his radio on the seat. A trail of footprints led into the forest, O'Malley's boots clearly identifiable, alongside another set of prints that the report described as unclassifiable. The search for O'Malley had continued for weeks. Hundreds of volunteers combed the forest, calling his name, checking every ravine and thicket. Dogs tracked his scent to a small clearing 5 miles from where his truck had been found, then lost it completely, as if O'Malley had simply vanished into thin air. What struck me most, reading through the file, were the notes O'Malley himself had made in the weeks leading up to his disappearance. He'd been tracking something, or thought he was. His patrol logs mentioned unusual sounds at night, areas where wildlife seemed abnormally scarce. A persistent feeling of being watched. "The forest feels wrong," he'd written just 3 days before he vanished. "Like it's holding its breath, waiting." I recognized the sentiment all too well. Most disturbing were the sketches O'Malley had made, rough drawings of what he'd glimpsed between the trees. A tall, thin figure with disproportionately long limbs. A face that wasn't quite a face. In one drawing, dated the day before his disappearance, he detailed what looked like a mask or hood of skin being pulled back to reveal something underneath. Something composed of writhing, tentacle-like appendages. My hands shook as I stared at the sketch. It was crude, the work of a man with more experience in forestry than art, but unmistakably the same creature I had encountered. The same thing that had attacked me, that had tried to drag me deeper into the woods. 2 years later, a pair of hikers vanished near where I was attacked. The file was thinner. Marjorie and Thomas Keller, experienced backpackers on a week-long trek through the national forest. They'd checked in at 3 different ranger stations along their planned route, each time reported as being in good spirits, well-equipped, completely unremarkable. Then they'd entered the eastern sector of the forest and were never seen again. No bodies, no sign of struggle, just gone. The search had been extensive but fruitless. Eventually they were presumed dead, likely from exposure or a fall in one of the area's many ravines. But I knew better now. That thing, it's been here before. The same twisted creature stalking the forest's edge, waiting for another victim. I continued through the files, finding more disappearances, more unusual incidents centered around the eastern boundary of the forest. A group of college students in 1982, a solo backpacker in 1990, a family of 4 in 1997, all vanished without a trace, all in the same general area. The reports grew more clinical over the years, the investigations less thorough, as if the authorities had simply accepted that people sometimes disappeared in the wilderness. But there was a pattern, one that became clearer the more I read. The disappearances weren't random, they followed a cycle, clusters of incidents every few years, followed by periods of relative quiet, as if the creature was feeding, then retreating to some hidden place to digest or hibernate. The most recent cluster had been in 2004-2005, 3 separate incidents, 7 people total. Then nothing until my encounter in 2008. I was still alive only because something had interrupted the creature's attack. The gunshots, perhaps, or some other factor I couldn't identify. O'Malley and the others hadn't been so fortunate. As night fell, I sat surrounded by open files, the faces of the missing staring up at me from old photographs. Ordinary people who had entered the forest and encountered something extraordinary and deadly. I felt a connection to them now, a responsibility. I had survived where they had not. I had seen the creature and lived to tell about it, but who would believe me? Granger had made it clear that my official report would make no mention of skin masks or tentacle faces. To the Forest Service, to the world at large, I would be just another ranger who'd had a frightening encounter with an unidentified predator. The creature would continue to hunt. More people would disappear. The cycle would go on, unbroken, unless I broke it. The idea took hold, growing stronger as I stared at the evidence spread across my table. I had seen the creature. I knew its hunting grounds, its patterns. I had wounded it. My gunshots had driven it away, at least temporarily. With preparation, with the right weapons, perhaps it could be killed. But even as the plan formed, another part of me recoiled in horror. The memory of those hollow eyes, that impossible face, the inhuman strength behind its claws. This was no ordinary predator. Whatever it was, it had existed in those woods for decades at least, perhaps much longer. It had claimed victims despite their numbers, their weapons, their experience. What chance did I have? Alone and already wounded. I gathered the files, placing them carefully back in the box. Then I retrieved my laptop, powered it on, and began to write. Not a plan of attack, but a record. Everything I had experienced, everything I had learned from the archives. If I couldn't stop the creature, at least I could document its existence, create a warning for others. As I typed, the windows of my cabin turned into black mirrors, reflecting my hunched form back at me. Occasionally I would glance up, startled by some sound from the surrounding forest. A branch scraping against the roof, an owl calling in the distance. Each time, I would scan the darkness beyond the glass, half expecting to see that face, those hollow eyes staring back at me. It's always hungry, always watching. And now I know it's never going to stop. I've since transferred to a quieter location, away from Chequamegon, a small ranger station in the Ozarks, where the forests are different, more open, less ancient, with fewer shadows for things to hide in. My colleagues here know me as the quiet ranger with the scars, the one who doesn't talk much about his previous posting. They don't know about the nightmares that still wake me most nights, drenched in sweat, throat raw from screaming. They don't see how I check and recheck the locks on my doors and windows, how I keep a loaded shotgun beside my bed. They haven't noticed that I never venture into the woods after sunset, that I'm always the first to return to the station when dusk approaches. The official report about my incident in Chequamegon lists my attacker as unidentified predator, possibly Ursine. My medical records describe extensive lacerations consistent with large animal attack. My psychiatric evaluation mentions post-traumatic stress disorder with elements of hypervigilance and night terrors. Nowhere is there any mention of a creature with hollow eyes and a face full of tentacles. Sometimes, in my weaker moments, I almost convince myself that they're right, that what I encountered was just a bear or some other conventional predator transformed by fear and blood loss into something monstrous, that the patterns I found in those old files were coincidences, the connections existing only in my traumatized mind. But then I'll catch sight of my scars in the mirror, those distinctive marks that no bear or wolf could have made. Or I'll wake from another dream of being dragged through endless forest by something that breathes like it's drowning. And I know the truth. The nightmares won't stop, not just of the attack itself, but of what might have happened had the creature succeeded in dragging me to wherever it takes its victims. In these dreams, I see a cave or pit deep in the forest, filled with the remains of those who disappeared over the decades. I see the creature feeding, not just on flesh but on fear, drawing out its victim's terror like nectar from a flower. Sometimes I dream I'm Robert O'Malley, experiencing his final moments as the creature pulls him into the darkness. Or I'm the Keller couple, holding hands as something inhuman descends upon their campsite. The faces change, but the end is always the same. Those hollow eyes, that skin peeling back to reveal what lies beneath. 3 months after my transfer, a package arrived from Granger. Inside was a newspaper clipping about a missing hiker in the Chickamauga, last seen near the eastern boundary. No note accompanied it, just the clipping. I understood the message. It was happening again, the cycle continuing. I should have felt vindicated. Here was evidence that my experience wasn't unique, that the creature was real and still hunting. Instead, I felt only a crushing guilt. I had survived. I had known the truth. And I had done nothing. That night, I sat down with a map of the Chickamauga National Forest, spreading it across my kitchen table. With a red marker, I began to plot the locations of every disappearance I had found in the archives, adding my own attack and the recent missing hiker. The pattern was unmistakable, a rough circle centered on an area of particularly dense forest, unmarked on official maps but known to local rangers as the dead zone for its notable lack of wildlife. It was always hungry, always watching. And now I knew it was never going to stop, unless someone stopped it. The decision wasn't made in a moment of courage or clarity. It grew slowly, taking root in the soil of my nightmares and guilt, nourished by each new report of missing hikers and campers. By the time I requested a leave of absence from my new posting, citing personal matters, the decision felt inevitable, as if it had been made long ago. I returned to Wisconsin in the early spring of 2009, renting a small cabin on the outskirts of Park Falls, not far from my previous home. The locals remembered me, the ranger who'd been mauled, who'd left under a cloud of whispers and speculation. They gave me a wide berth which suited my purposes. I spent weeks preparing, gathering equipment, studying maps, conditioning my body for what was to come. My wounds had healed as much as they ever would, leaving me with a permanent limp and limited mobility in my right shoulder. Not ideal for what I was planning, but I had advantages the creature's previous victims hadn't had. Knowledge of its existence, its hunting grounds, its methods. On a cool April morning, I drove to the edge of the Chickamauga, parking my rented SUV at a little-used trailhead near the eastern boundary. In my pack were provisions for 3 days, a high-powered rifle with night vision scope, flares, traps, and a satellite phone. Around my neck hung a digital camera in a waterproof case, loaded with fresh batteries and empty memory cards. If I didn't survive this expedition, I wanted to leave evidence, proof that the creature existed, that it had claimed not just me but dozens of others over the decades. The forest welcomed me back with the same oppressive silence I remembered. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just the whisper of wind through pine needles and the soft crunch of my boots on the forest floor. Every step sent pain shooting through my damaged leg, a constant reminder of my last encounter with what lurked in these woods. I made camp well before sunset, choosing a defensible position with clear lines of sight in all directions. As darkness fell, I positioned myself with my back to a massive oak, rifle across my knees, night vision goggles ready. The plan was simple. I would not hunt the creature. I would let it hunt me. For 2 days, nothing happened. I moved camp each morning, venturing deeper into the area where the disappearances had clustered, leaving obvious signs of my presence, freshly cut branches, footprints, even the remains of small cooking fires, bait for a predator I knew was watching. On the 3rd day, I found something that froze the blood in my veins. Nestled in a small clearing was a crude structure of sorts. Not a shelter built by human hands, but something else, Branches and saplings had been woven together to form a kind of dome covered with layers of leaves, moss, and something that looked disturbingly like dried skin. The entrance was low, forcing anything entering to crawl on hands and knees. I approached cautiously, rifle at the ready, every sense straining for danger. The structure exuded that same chemical organic smell I remembered from my encounter with the creature. Around its base, the ground was discolored, stained with what might have been old blood. I should have left immediately, radioed for backup, brought in a team with proper equipment and firepower. That would have been the sensible choice. Instead, I raised my camera and began documenting the structure, circling it slowly, capturing every detail. That's when I noticed the objects scattered around the base of the dome. Small personal items that had no place in the wilderness. A wristwatch with a cracked face. A child's stuffed rabbit, filthy and torn. A tarnished wedding ring, mementos of the taken, arranged like trophies or offerings. Among them was a Forest Service badge, its surface corroded by years of exposure to the elements. With trembling fingers, I picked it up, turning it over to reveal the name still faintly visible, R. O'Malley. I was so focused on the badge that I almost missed the sound, that same wet, labored breathing I remembered from the night of my attack. It came from everywhere and nowhere, seeming to emanate from the forest itself. Slowly, I raised my head. And there it was, standing at the edge of the clearing, those hollow eyes fixed on me with what I could only interpret as recognition. It remembered me. The prey that had escaped. In the daylight, the creature was even more horrifying than in my memories. Its skin had the pallor of something that lived in darkness, stretched tight over a frame that was both emaciated and powerful. The limbs were wrong. Too long, jointed in places human limbs shouldn't bend, ending in those terrible clawed hands that had left their mark across my body. But it was the face that held me transfixed. What I had taken for a mask in our first encounter was actually a flap of skin that extended from its skull, capable of being drawn back like a hood. And now it was peeling back, revealing what lay beneath. Not eyes or nose or mouth, but a mass of writhing, tentacle-like appendages, each tipped with what looked like tiny, grasping mouths. Time seemed to stop as we regarded each other across the clearing. I became aware of my heart thundering in my chest, the cold sweat soaking through my clothes, the rifle trembling in my hands. Fear threatened to overwhelm me, to send me running blindly through the forest as prey before predator. Instead, I raised the rifle and fired. The shot echoed through the clearing, and the creature jerked as the bullet found its mark. But it didn't fall, didn't even stagger. Those tentacles writhed more frantically, and a sound emerged from somewhere within its body. Not a roar of pain, but a high, keening wail that set my teeth on edge. I fired again, and again, each shot striking true but seeming to have little effect beyond agitating the creature further. It began to move toward me, not charging as it had during our first encounter, but advancing with a terrible deliberation, those long limbs covering the ground with unnatural grace. I backpedaled, still firing, the rifle's report deafening in the confined space of the clearing. The creature's movements became jerky, fluid leaking from multiple wounds, not blood but something darker, thicker, with that same chemical smell I'd noticed before. My back hit a tree, stopping my retreat. The creature was only yards away now, those tentacle mouths reaching toward me, quivering with what might have been anticipation or hunger. I dropped the empty rifle and drew the pistol from my hip holster, firing point blank into what passed for the creature's chest. It staggered then, for the first time showing signs that my weapons were having an effect. The fluid leaked more profusely from its wounds, steaming slightly where it hit the forest floor. The keening wail grew louder, modulating into something that almost sounded like speech. Not words I could understand, but patterns that suggested language, or at least sentience. In that moment, staring into those writhing face tentacles, I had a terrible realization. This thing wasn't just some predatory animal, some evolutionary aberration that had found its niche in the deep woods. It was something else entirely, something that thought, that planned, that collected trophies from its victims, something that had been hunting in these woods for generations, taking what it wanted, retreating to its hidden places to consume its prey at leisure. Not just their bodies, but something else, their fear, their pain, their very essence. The pistol clicked empty, and I reached for the hunting knife at my belt, knowing it was futile but unwilling to die without a fight. The creature surged forward, those clawed hands closing around my throat, lifting me off the ground with terrible strength. I slashed wildly with the knife, feeling it connect with something solid, hearing that keening wail rise in pitch. The claws dug deeper, cutting off my air, the world starting to dim around the edges. In desperation, I fumbled in my pocket for the flare gun I'd brought as a last resort. The creature pulled me closer, those tentacle mouths quivering inches from my face. I could see now that each was tipped not just with a mouth but with rows of needle-like teeth, designed for tearing, for consuming. One reached out, brushing against my cheek with a touch that burned like acid. With the last of my strength, I raised the flare gun and fired directly into the mass of tentacles. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The flare ignited whatever fluid composed the creature's body, setting the tentacles ablaze. It released me instantly, recoiling with a shriek that no human vocal cords could have produced. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, watching as the creature thrashed and writhed, the fire spreading across its body. The skin hood burned away first, revealing more of the tentacle mass beneath. Then the limbs began to blacken and curl, the joints bending in impossible directions as the creature's movements became more frantic. The shrieking continued, modulating into something that might have been speech or might have been merely the death throes of something never meant to exist in our world. I should have run then, should have put as much distance as possible between myself and the burning creature. Instead, I watched, transfixed, as it collapsed to the ground, those hollow eyes fixed on me even as the fire consumed it. In its gaze, I saw not just pain or rage, but something that might have been recognition, one sentient being acknowledging another across an unbridgeable gulf of difference. Then the eyes were gone, consumed by the flames, and the shrieking stopped. The creature continued to burn, the fire hot enough that I had to shield my face from the heat. The smell was indescribable. That same chemical odor, but magnified 100-fold, mixed with something like burning rubber and rotting vegetation. When it was over, when the flames had died down to embers, I approached cautiously, knife still in hand. Where the creature had been was now just a blackened mass, unrecognizable as anything that had once lived. I poked at it with a stick, half expecting it to reanimate, to lunge at me one last time, but it remained inert, dead. I should have felt triumph, or at least relief. Instead, I felt hollow, as if something essential had been burned out of me along with the creature. I had come seeking answers, seeking an end to the nightmares that plagued me, but the questions remained, multiplied now by what I had witnessed. What was it? Where had it come from? Had it always existed in these woods, preying on humans unfortunate enough to cross its path? Or was it something new, something that had found its way into our world from elsewhere? I would never know. Perhaps that was for the best. I documented everything. The structure, the trophies, the charred remains of the creature. Then I gathered the personal items I had found, including O'Malley's badge. These at least could be returned to the families of the missing, offering some small closure to decades of uncertainty. As I prepared to leave the clearing, a sound stopped me. A soft rustling from within the dome-like structure. I froze, knife raised, every muscle tensed for another confrontation. Had there been more than one creature? Or worse, offspring? Slowly I approached the low entrance to the structure, heart pounding in my ears. The rustling continued, accompanied now by a soft, whimpering sound that was unmistakably human. I dropped to my knees, peering into the darkness of the dome. At first, I saw nothing. Then my eyes adjusted, and I made out a form huddled at the far side of the structure. Small, curled into a fetal position, trembling. "Hello?" I called softly. "I'm here to help." "You're safe now." The figure uncurled slightly, revealing the face of a young woman, the missing hiker from the newspaper clipping Granger had sent. Her eyes were wide with terror, her clothing torn and filthy, but she was alive. "It's gone," I assured her, extending my hand. "The thing that took you. It's dead." She stared at me for a long moment, as if unable to comprehend my words. Then, with agonizing slowness, she reached out and took my hand. Her skin was cold, her grip weak, but there was life in her eyes, traumatized, forever changed, but alive. As I helped her from the structure, supporting her weight with my own damaged body, I glanced back at the charred remains of the creature. In death it seemed smaller somehow, less monstrous, just another dead thing in a forest full of life and death. But I knew better. Whatever it had been, whatever others like it might still exist in the dark corners of the world, it had been more than just a predator. It had been a nightmare made flesh, a reminder that the universe is vaster and stranger than our comfortable myths allow. I radioed for emergency evacuation, reporting that I had found the missing hiker. I said nothing about the creature, nothing about the structure or the trophies. Those details would come later, in confidential reports that would likely be filed away and forgotten, just as O'Malley's had been. As the rescue helicopter descended into the clearing, rotor wash scattering the ashes of the creature, I made a silent promise to O'Malley, to the Kellers, to all the others who had vanished into these woods over the decades. Their stories would be told, their ends would be known. Whatever the cost to my credibility, to my career, the truth would not be buried again. The young woman squeezed my hand as the medical team approached, her eyes conveying what words could not. Gratitude, yes, but also a shared understanding. We had both seen behind the veil of ordinary reality. We had both encountered something that shouldn't exist but did. And we had survived. That was 6 months ago. The official report lists the young woman's ordeal as an abduction by unknown subject, with no mention of anything supernatural or unexplainable. Her own testimony has been dismissed as the product of trauma and exposure, her descriptions of her captor attributed to hallucinations brought on by dehydration and fear. As for me, I've left the Forest Service entirely. My credentials as a reliable witness were already damaged by my first encounter. This second incident, complete with wild tales of dome structures and burning monsters, was enough to end my career. I didn't fight it. Some truths aren't meant for official reports and government databases. Instead, I've taken to collecting stories, accounts of similar creatures sighted in wilderness areas across the country. Reports of hikers and campers gone missing in circumstances that echo what happened in the Chequamegon. Testimonies from those who, like me, encountered something they can't explain and weren't believed. Patterns are emerging. The creatures, if there are indeed more than one, seem to favor old-growth forests, areas with minimal human presence. They hunt in cycles, taking multiple victims over a short period, then going dormant for years. They collect trophies, and they're learning, adapting to human weapons and tactics. I keep a map on my wall, red pins marking confirmed sightings, blue pins for disappearances that fit the pattern. The pins cluster in certain areas, the Pacific Northwest, parts of Appalachia, the deeper reaches of national forests and wilderness areas, places where the human footprint is lightest, where the old darkness still holds sway. Sometimes, late at night, I stand before this map and wonder, are we the invaders? Is our relentless expansion into wild places triggering defensive responses from entities that were here long before us? Or are these creatures something new, something emerging from the wounds we've inflicted on the natural world? I have no answers, only questions and the scars that ache when rain is coming. The nightmares have lessened but not disappeared. I still wake sometimes, heart pounding, convinced that hollow-eyed gaze is fixed on me from the shadows of my bedroom. But there's one certainty I cling to, one truth that keeps me searching, collecting, mapping. I killed one. Whatever these creatures are, however ancient or numerous, they can be fought, they can be destroyed. They are not invincible, and if there are more out there, watching, waiting, hunting, they too can be stopped. Not by official agencies or government task forces, but by those of us who know the truth, those of us who have seen behind the veil and lived to tell the tale. The young woman I rescued contacts me occasionally. She's in therapy now, trying to rebuild a life shattered by an experience few would believe. But she knows what we faced in those woods. She remembers the creature's touch, its hunger, its alien intelligence. She understands why I keep searching, keep collecting stories. "Do you think there are more?" she asked, during our last conversation, her voice small but steady. "Yes," I answered honestly. "But now we know how to fight them." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "If you find another one, I want to help." I started to protest, to tell her she'd been through enough, that she should focus on healing. But I stopped myself. The determination in her voice was familiar, the same resolve that drives me to continue this lonely crusade. "If I find another one," I promised, "you'll be the first to know." After we hung up, I returned to my map, to my collection of stories and sightings. Somewhere out there, in the deep woods, in the places where shadows lie thick and ancient, they're watching, waiting, hunting. But now, we're hunting them too. It's always hungry, always watching. And now I know it's never going to stop, but neither will I. I'm a National Parks Ranger. Let me tell you that these guys have some of the best, creepiest, and completely unexplainable stories you'll ever hear. Some of them have been in the game for decades, and they should honestly pitch some of their stories to Netflix or something. Regular Joes would never believe me. I mean, if you heard some of the things we came across just on regular routine patrols and driving around. The particular park we look after is huge. I mean, absolutely massive. Miles and miles, and well, you get the picture. We knew that there were old shacks and houses on the land, and when I say houses, I mean more like something from the frontier times or one of these off-grid types. We've never actually come across one where somebody still lives in it. I guess the days of just making a home wherever you laid your hat on are long gone, and oftentimes when we would come across one, it would have been left to rack and ruined. Usually not much remains other than some rotting wood and a few reminders that a person at one point or another used to live here before animals have moved in and taken over. However, this one time we came across something that was more than a little weird. I've been working at Blackwater Ridge National Forest for almost 9 years now. That's enough time to see things that would make your skin crawl. Not supernatural things. I don't believe in that nonsense, but nature can be brutal. I've found the remains of hikers who misjudged the weather, seen what bears do to an unattended campsite, and pulled bloated bodies from the lake after spring thaw, but nothing compared to what Hunter and I found that October. Hunter Reynolds had been my partner for about 3 years. Ex-military, built like a linebacker but with the patience of a saint. He'd seen combat in Afghanistan, and very little rattled him. We made a good team. I knew the forest, and he knew how to handle just about any situation that came up. That fall had been unusually warm, and we were taking advantage of it to conduct some extended surveys in the northwestern quadrant of the park. This was genuine backcountry, no designated trails, no campsites, just wilderness that hadn't changed much in the last century. The area was so remote that we rarely patrolled there, maybe once every few years. "You sure about these coordinates?" Hunter asked, squinting at the GPS as our Park Service truck lurched over yet another fallen log. The service road had disappeared miles back, and we were basically forging our own path through the forest. "That's what they gave us," I replied, gripping the wheel tighter as we bounced through a shallow creek. "The ornithology team wants data from as many different ecosystems as possible. Apparently there's been some unusual migration patterns." Hunter grunted, reaching for his thermos. "2 days out here to count birds. Could think of better ways to spend my weekend." "Like what?" "Watching football in your cabin and drinking that swill you call beer." I laughed, knowing full well that's exactly what he'd be doing if we weren't out here. "Don't knock it till you've tried it," he smirked. We'd been on an overnight to get as far out as we could onto this piece of land. Like I said, you could drive for hours and not come close to seeing anything at all except forests, trees, and, surprisingly, more forest. Some areas were so thickly overgrown it was impossible to get back there. But we were doing some research on the different birds found in the area, which required us to cover as much ground as possible. It was mid-afternoon on the second day when the forest thinned slightly, revealing a small clearing ahead. I slowed the truck to a crawl. "Hold up," Hunter said, leaning forward. "What's that?" Through the trees, barely visible, was what looked like a structure. This wasn't entirely unusual. The park had dozens of old hunting cabins and homesteads scattered throughout, most abandoned decades ago when the land became federally protected. But this far out? That was odd. I killed the engine, and we sat for a moment, listening to the tick of the cooling motor and the distant call of a raven. "Should we check it out?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Hunter was already reaching for his pack. Might as well. Could be a squatter. We'd dealt with illegal residents before, usually down on their luck types or survivalists who thought federal land was up for grabs. They were rarely dangerous, just stubborn. As we approached on foot, the silence became more pronounced. No birds calling, no squirrels chattering, just the sound of our boots on the forest floor and the occasional creak of a tree in the light breeze. That was when we came across the hut. Now, it isn't wholly unusual to find these, but as I said, they're usually dilapidated. This one, however, although on the small side, looked to be in pretty decent condition, at least from the outside. The wooden structure looked old and weathered, but was still standing. It was a simple one-room affair, maybe 12 feet by 15 feet, with a pitched roof that still had most of its shingles intact. The logs had darkened with age, and thick moss covered the north-facing wall, but there was something unnervingly well-preserved about it. No broken windows, no collapsed sections, no obvious animal damage. Most telling of all, no tracks, not even game trails. It was as if the forest itself was avoiding this place. "How old you think this is?" Hunter asked, circling to the side of the structure. I ran my hand along the rough-hewn logs. "Hard to say. The construction style looks turn of the century, but it's been maintained. Or at least, it was at some point. We couldn't see any obvious holes where animals had gotten inside. I was with my buddy and colleague Hunter, and we both jumped out of the truck to take a better look. There was an actual door to the structure since it was completely overgrown all around with no obvious tracks beside our own. We summarized that there was nobody home, or at least had been for a long time. The door actually seemed to be locked. Hunter tried the handle. "Locked," he confirmed. "Nobody uses padlocks out here." I checked my watch. We had several hours of daylight left and the bird survey could wait. Something about this place demanded investigation. Standard procedure? I asked. Hunter nodded. I'll document while you check for entry. I pulled out my radio to log our position and actions protocol when investigating any structure, but was met with nothing but static. Not unusual this deep in the backcountry, but still annoying. No signal, I muttered, tucking it back into my belt. We'll log it when we get back. Hunter was already taking photos with his department-issued camera, documenting the exterior condition of the cabin. I approached the door again. It was solid wood with a simple iron handle and what appeared to be a deadbolt lock. This wasn't some flimsy interior door. This was built to keep things out, or perhaps to keep something in. The wood around the lock had begun to rot, softened by years of rain and snow. I pressed my shoulder against it, testing its give. You sure about that? Hunter asked, lowering his camera. If someone's squatting, we need to know, I replied. Besides, this place has been abandoned for years. With a firm push, I felt the wood around the lock start to splinter. One more solid shove, and the deadbolt tore free from the rotted frame, the door swinging inward with a low, protesting groan. The darkness inside seemed to reach out like something alive, and a wave of cold, stale air washed over us. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Little did I know, we were about to uncover a mystery that would haunt me for the rest of my career. Upon entering the property, we were hit by the expected smell of rot and mildew, but not the usual animal feces and stink we were used to. There were no windows, so we just used our flashlights, finding some old lamps that the owner must have had when things got dark. The beam of my flashlight cut through the gloom, particles of dust dancing in its path. The air felt thick, almost difficult to breathe, and carried an odor I couldn't quite place. Musty and stale, yes, but with an underlying chemical tang. Preservatives, maybe, or some kind of solvent. Jesus, Hunter whispered, his voice unnaturally loud in the silence. It's like a time capsule in here. He wasn't wrong. Aside from being shut up for God knows how long, the place was surprisingly tidy. Whoever had lived here had been house proud. It might have been a small hut in the woods, but everything seemed to have a place. Dishes were stacked on shelves, the tiny sink empty, the bed in the corner was even made, clothes and blankets folded neatly close by. There was even a small table laid for dinner. My flashlight beam revealed a scene of eerie orderliness. A small wooden table stood in the center of the room, set with 2 plates, 2 cups, and 2 sets of silverware, all arranged with meticulous precision. A thin layer of dust coated everything, undisturbed for what must have been years. Against the far wall was a narrow bed, its woolen blanket pulled tight with military precision. Beside it stood a small nightstand with an oil lamp and what looked like a leather-bound journal. Above the bed hung a crucifix, its shadow stretching across the wall like a dark sentinel. A small pot-bellied stove occupied one corner, cold and silent for years. Shelves lined another wall, stocked with preserves and mason jars, their contents now discolored and unidentifiable. Hanging from hooks on the ceiling were bundles of dried herbs and what appeared to be animal parts, preservation techniques from another era. Check this out, Hunter said, his flashlight illuminating a series of photographs tacked to the wall. They were faded and yellowed, but I could make out the images. A stern-faced man standing in front of the very cabin we were in, the same man with what appeared to be a small dog at his feet, and most disturbingly, a photograph of 2 men standing side by side, their faces scratched out with something sharp. I moved closer to examine the photographs. The man was tall and gaunt, with a full beard and the weathered look of someone who had spent his life outdoors. His eyes were deep-set and intense, staring into the camera with an expression that seemed almost accusatory. The dog was some kind of terrier mix, small but alert-looking. Any idea when these were taken? Hunter asked. I studied the style and quality. Early 1980s would be my guess. Maybe late 70s. Hunter nodded, moving his flashlight around the room. So our mystery man was here fairly recently, historically speaking. Looks that way, I agreed, turning my attention to the rest of the cabin. What struck me most was the absence of certain things. No television, no radio, not even a battery-powered clock. This person had lived completely off the grid, isolated from the modern world. The only concessions to technology were a kerosene lamp and what looked like a hand-cranked emergency radio, now caked with dust on a high shelf. Hunter moved toward the small kitchen area, where a cast iron skillet hung from a hook and a few dented aluminum pots were stacked neatly on a shelf. He opened a small cabinet, revealing a few canned goods, their labels faded beyond recognition. "Whoever lived here was prepared to stay for the long haul," he remarked. I nodded, sweeping my flashlight across the floor. That's when I noticed something odd. Scratch marks near the door, as if something had been desperately trying to get out. Or perhaps, trying to keep something from getting in. We did notice some scratches and a mess by the door which seemed strange compared to the rest of the interior. But that was soon solved when we discovered a canine skeleton at the end of the bed. Whoever this place had belonged to had left the dog inside when they just up and left. The beam of my flashlight caught something in the corner. A small heap that at first glance looked like discarded clothing. But as I approached, the shape revealed itself in the harsh light. "Hunter," I called, my voice tight. "You need to see this." The remains were almost perfectly preserved, desiccated rather than decomposed, the dry air of the cabin having effectively mummified what was once a small dog. It lay curled up as if asleep, its skin drawn tight over its frame, teeth bared in a final grimace. Dark matted fur still clung to parts of its body, and its clouded eyes stared sightlessly at the wall. I say skeleton, but it was clearly a dog that was mummified, and not much left of it. That really got to me, being an animal lover. But there was something else too, although I couldn't quite put my finger on it yet. Hunter crouched beside me, his face grim. Poor little guy. Looks like he starved to death. I examined the remains more closely, careful not to disturb them. "Yeah, but why? If the owner left, why not take his dog, or at least let it out?" We both fell silent, contemplating the implications. The dog had been left to die, locked inside this cabin. Either the owner couldn't return, or they chose not to. "Let's keep looking," Hunter said finally, standing up. "Maybe there's something that explains all this." I nodded, moving toward a small desk tucked into the corner. It was a simple construction, little more than a plank of wood on 4 legs, but it held what appeared to be a ledger or journal. I carefully opened it, the brittle pages threatening to crumble under my touch. The handwriting was neat and precise, almost obsessively so. Dates, locations, and cryptic notations filled the pages. The most recent entry was from October 17, 1983, almost exactly 42 years ago to the day. "Listen to this," I said, reading from the journal. "It's been watching the cabin again, standing just at the tree line where it thinks I can't see it, but I know it's there. The dog won't stop barking. I've loaded the shotgun, but I don't think it will help. Not against something like that." Hunter frowned. "What the hell does that mean? Something like that?" I shook my head, turning the page, but the rest was blank. Whatever had happened after October 17th, the cabin's occupant hadn't recorded it. My initial thought was perhaps the person had been out hunting, maybe had an accident, been hurt, or unable to get help, and never returned. I wondered if they simply wandered off into the woods and killed themselves. However, we both then noted a single shotgun mounted on the wall. Then I noticed something else. The small table was indeed laid with plates and cutlery for 2 people. 2 place settings, Hunter noted, running his finger through the dust on the table. Was he expecting company all the way out here? I examined the shotgun mounted on the wall. An old Remington 870, well maintained despite its age. The wood was polished, the barrel oiled. Whoever owned it had taken good care of their weapon. If he went hunting, why leave this behind, I wondered aloud. And if he was expecting trouble, why not have it loaded and ready? Hunter was examining the door now, his flashlight beam highlighting the splintered wood where the deadbolt had been. "What's odd," he said slowly, "is that the deadbolt was engaged from the inside. Whoever left this place didn't use the door." I felt a chill run down my spine. "That's impossible. There are no windows, no other exits." We weren't concerned about it being any sort of crime scene after all this time, so we removed the shotgun to take back with us. We'd do some digging in the off chance it might be registered. There was nothing else in there to help with any identification or value to return to any family members. That is, if we ever worked out who'd actually been there. I carefully lifted the shotgun from its mount, checking to see if it was loaded. It wasn't. I broke it open, inspecting the chamber and barrel, clean as if it had been recently maintained. "We should take this back," I said. "Maybe we can trace the serial number, find out who owned it." Hunter nodded, still examining the cabin with methodical precision. He was in the corner now, where a small stack of journals and notebooks was piled neatly on a shelf. "You should see these," he called. Whoever lived here was documenting something. I joined him, balancing the shotgun carefully as I leaned in to look. The notebooks were filled with detailed drawings, intricate sketches of the surrounding forest, maps with locations marked with cryptic symbols, and most disturbingly, page after page of the same elongated figure, standing just at the edge of the tree line. The drawings were skillful but unsettling, the figure always partially obscured by trees, its proportions not quite right. "What do you make of this?" Hunter asked, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. I shook my head. Guy was isolated out here for too long, started seeing things, but even as I said it, I felt a nagging doubt. The drawings were too consistent, too precise. This wasn't the random scribbling of a madman. This was documentation. We were just closing the door back up when suddenly the thing that had been looking us in the face, the thing that had been gnawing at me, making me question this particular hut over all the others, became apparent, like a light bulb going off. It was locked from the inside. There were no windows. It wasn't really big enough for a second entrance, and there was one way in and out, all having been locked, which was massively atypical in itself. "Wait," I said, my hand on the doorframe. "This doesn't make sense." Hunter looked at me, waiting. "The door was locked from the inside," I continued, working through it out loud. "There are no windows, no other exits. How did he leave?" We both stood in silence, the implications sinking in. This small hut, but incredibly neat hut, which barely enough room for one person, had a tiny table set for two, had been locked from the inside with no other way out, and yet the only bones were those of a small dog. "Maybe there's a trap door?" Hunter suggested, already moving back inside, his flashlight beam sweeping the floor. I followed, examining the walls for any sign of a hidden exit. We searched methodically, checking every inch of the small cabin, but found nothing. No secret passages, no hidden doors, not even a loose floorboard. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the open door. We needed to get back to the truck before dark. "We should head back," Hunter said, voicing my thoughts. "We can report this, come back with a team if necessary." I nodded, taking one last look around the cabin. Something about this place felt wrong, like we were missing something obvious. But what? As we stepped outside, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. The cabin had an oppressive quality to it, a heaviness that was difficult to define. The forest, by contrast, felt alive and welcoming as the golden hour light filtered through the canopy. We secured the door as best we could with some rope from our packs, marking the location on our GPS. The shotgun was wrapped carefully in a blanket and stowed in the truck. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the image of that tiny cabin from my mind, perfectly preserved, meticulously maintained, yet abandoned in the strangest way possible. A man had vanished without a trace, leaving everything behind, including his faithful dog. How could someone lock a door from the inside and then disappear? Little did I know, this was just the beginning of the mystery. We took the gun back to base, did a ton of research, but never found out who had lived there, never resolved any of the mystery of what happened to them, or how the door had seemingly locked itself, or of course how the owner just managed to vanish out of thin air. The drive back to headquarters was mostly silent, both of us lost in our thoughts about what we'd discovered. The forest grew darker around us, shadows deepening between the trees as the sun set. Twice I thought I saw movement just off the road, but when I slowed and directed the headlights toward it, there was nothing there. "You see something?" Hunter asked the second time I slowed the truck. I shook my head. "Thought I did. Just shadows playing tricks." He nodded, but I noticed his hand had moved to rest on his sidearm. By the time we reached the ranger station, it was fully dark. The main building was quiet, with only a few lights on in the administrative wing where the night staff would be monitoring emergency communications. We logged our return and secured the shotgun in the evidence locker. It was too late to do any serious research, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something important. I pulled the duty roster toward me, checking who was scheduled for the next day. "We should talk to Jenkins," I suggested. "He's been here longer than anyone, might know something about that area." Hunter agreed. "First thing tomorrow, I'll run the shotgun serial number, see if that leads anywhere." I should have gone home then, gotten some rest, but instead I found myself in the archives, pulling old maps and incident reports for the Northwestern Quadrant. Most of the files were digitized now, but the older records were still kept in filing cabinets in the basement, yellowed paper and faded ink chronicling decades of park history. I lost track of time as I pored over the documents, searching for any mention of a cabin in that area, any record of a permit issued, any report of a missing person. My eyes burned from the strain of reading in the dim light, but I couldn't stop. It was past midnight when I found it, a missing person report from November 1983. A man named Thomas Reeves, 54, had failed to return from a hunting trip in the Northwestern Quadrant. Search parties had been dispatched but found no trace of him. The case had eventually gone cold, one of many unsolved disappearances in the vast wilderness, but what caught my attention was a detail in the personal effects section. Subject reportedly owned a cabin within park boundaries, location unknown, and was accompanied by a small terrier-type dog named Jack. I felt a chill run down my spine. This had to be our guy. I photocopied the report and continued searching, now with a name to guide me. I found several more mentions of Thomas Reeves, a citation for illegal trapping in 1979, a permit application for a research cabin in 1980, approved with coordinates that roughly matched our discovery, and most interestingly, a complaint filed by Reeves himself in July 1983, just months before his disappearance. The complaint was bizarre. Reeves had come to the ranger station claiming that someone or something was stalking him at his cabin. The ranger who took the report, a man named Carlson, had clearly been skeptical, noting that Reeves appeared agitated and sleep-deprived and that his claims were inconsistent and paranoid in nature. Reeves had insisted that a figure had been watching his cabin for weeks, standing just at the edge of the clearing, never approaching but never leaving either. He claimed his dog would bark at it incessantly, and that sometimes at night he could hear it moving around the cabin, testing the walls. Carlson had promised to send a patrol to check on the cabin, but noted that due to the remote location, it might be several weeks before they could get out there. There was no record of whether that patrol ever happened. I was still reading when I heard footsteps on the stairs. Hunter appeared in the doorway, looking concerned. "You're still here? It's almost 2 a.m. I gestured to the files spread out before me. I found him. The cabin owner, Thomas Reeves, went missing in November 1983. Hunter raised an eyebrow, coming to look over my shoulder. "What's the story?" I handed him the complaint form. Sounds like he was being stalked by something before he disappeared. And get this, he had a dog named Jack. Hunter read quickly, his frown deepening. "You think there's any truth to this? Could have been another person, maybe someone with a grudge, out there?" I shook my head. "That's seriously remote terrain even now. In the 80s, it would have been virtually inaccessible except to someone who really knew the area." "Maybe that's exactly who was after him," Hunter suggested. "Another backcountry type who didn't like sharing the territory." It was a plausible theory, and certainly more rational than some of the thoughts that had been creeping into my mind. "There's something else," I said, pointing to a notation at the bottom of Reeves' permit application. "He wasn't always alone out there. He had a research partner, at least initially, Dr. Alan Hayes, anthropologist from the State University. They were documenting old trapper cabins and Native American sites in the area." Hunter leaned in. "Any record of what happened to Hayes?" I shook my head. "Nothing in these files, but there's a reference number for his separate permit application. We'd need to request it from Central Archives. First thing tomorrow," Hunter said firmly. "For now, you need sleep." "So do I." He was right. My eyes were burning and the words on the pages were starting to blur. I gathered the most important documents, locking the rest back in the filing cabinet. As we walked to our vehicles, the night air crisp and cold, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. The stars were brilliant overhead, the forest around the compound deep in shadow. I found myself scanning the tree line, looking for, what? A figure standing just at the edge of visibility. "You okay?" Hunter asked, noticing my distraction. "Yeah," I lied. "Just tired. I didn't sleep well that night." Dreams of narrow cabins and locked doors chased me through restless hours, and more than once I woke thinking I heard scratching at my bedroom window. But each time I checked, there was nothing there, just the wind moving tree branches against the glass. Morning came too soon, gray light seeping through my curtains as my alarm blared. I showered and dressed mechanically, my mind still in that cabin, still trying to make sense of what we'd found. The shotgun, the meticulously set table, the locked door, the missing man and his poor abandoned dog. I arrived at the station early, finding Hunter already at his desk, phone pressed to his ear. He gestured for me to wait as he finished his call. "That was the firearms registry," he said as he hung up. "The shotgun was registered to Thomas Reeves in 1978. Never reported stolen, never transferred to another owner." I nodded, unsurprised. I pulled his employment records from the university archives online. He was a forest ecologist, specialized in isolated ecosystems. Hayes was his research partner, an anthropologist studying frontier settlements. They got a joint grant to document historical sites in the national park. "Any record of Hayes after 1983? I shook my head. His faculty page says he took early retirement in December 1983, just a month after Reeves disappeared. No publications after that date. I'm trying to track down a current address or phone number, but no luck so far." Hunter leaned back in his chair thinking. "So we have two men doing research together in an isolated cabin. One disappears under mysterious circumstances, The other retires suddenly a month later. Coincidence? Seems unlikely, I agreed. But what's the connection? And how does it explain a door locked from the inside with no other way out? Before Hunter could respond, Jenkins appeared in the doorway, the senior ranger, a weathered man in his 60s who had worked the park since before either of us was born. His eyebrows rose as he took in the scattered papers and our serious expressions. "Heard you two found something interesting yesterday," he said, ambling into the office and helping himself to coffee from the pot in the corner. "Cabin in the northwestern quadrant," Hunter confirmed. "Belonged to a man named Thomas Reeves. Went missing in '83. You remember anything about that?" Jenkins' hand paused halfway to his mouth, his expression growing serious. "Reeves? Yeah, I remember him. Strange case. I was fairly new then, but I was part of one of the search parties." "What can you tell us?" I asked eagerly. Jenkins settled into an empty chair, looking thoughtful. "Reeves was an odd duck. Brilliant, according to everyone who knew him, but not exactly social. Had some kind of falling out with his research partner, Hayes, I think the name was. After that, he spent more and more time at that cabin alone." "Did you know Hayes?" Hunter asked. Jenkins shook his head. "Only by reputation. He came around the station a few times with Reeves in the early days, but after their disagreement, it was just Reeves." "Do you know what they argued about?" I pressed. Jenkins sipped his coffee. "Something about their research. Reeves wanted to publish, Hayes didn't. Said they needed more evidence before going public. At least, that's the gossip I heard." "And the disappearance?" Hunter prompted. Jenkins' expression darkened. "Strangest thing I've seen in 40 years of service. We found the cabin just like you described, locked from the inside, everything in perfect order, no signs of struggle, no blood, nothing to indicate what happened. Just that poor dog, already dead by the time we got there." "No theories on how he got out?" I asked. "Nothing that made sense," Jenkins admitted. "We searched every inch of that place. No trapdoors, no hidden exits. The official report ruled it an unexplained disappearance, presumed dead after wandering away from the cabin. But he trailed off." "But what?" Hunter pressed. Jenkins looked uncomfortable. "It didn't add up. Reeves knew those woods better than anyone. He wouldn't just wander off and get lost. And then there were the reports." "Reports?" I echoed. "In the weeks before he disappeared, Reeves came in several times claiming he was being watched. Said something was stalking his cabin. We wrote it off as paranoia. Guy living alone in the woods too long, you know how it goes. But after he vanished," Jenkins shook his head. "3 of the search party members reported seeing someone watching them from the trees. When they gave chase, they found nothing. No tracks, no signs anyone had been there." A chill ran down my spine. "Just like in Reeves' journals. He drew pictures of a figure watching from the tree line." Jenkins nodded gravely. "The search was called off after 2 weeks. No trace of Reeves was ever found." "And Hayes?" Hunter asked. "Was he interviewed?" "Extensively," Jenkins confirmed. "He had an alibi, was lecturing at a conference in Seattle when Reeves disappeared. But he left the university soon after, moved away. Some people thought he knew more than he was saying, but there was never any evidence connecting him to the disappearance." I exchanged a glance with Hunter. We were both thinking the same thing. We needed to find Hayes. "Any idea where Hayes might be now?" I asked. Jenkins shrugged. "Last I heard, he moved up to Alaska. That was years ago, though. Could be anywhere now, if he's even still alive. He'd be in his 80s. As Jenkins left, Hunter and I sat in silence for a moment, processing what we'd learned. "So," Hunter said finally, "we have a missing researcher, a mysterious figure stalking the cabin, a door locked from the inside, and a research partner who suddenly retired and disappeared himself. And a table set for 2, I added quietly. "Don't forget that." Hunter's eyes met mine. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" I nodded. "We need to go back to that cabin." The next day dawned cold and clear, a perfect October morning. Hunter and I loaded up the truck with more equipment this time. Better lights, cameras, measuring tools, and evidence collection kits. We weren't just exploring now, we were investigating. The drive seemed shorter this time, though it was still several hours before we approached the remote area where we'd found the cabin. The forest felt different somehow, more watchful, the shadows between the trees deeper than they should have been in the bright morning light. "You feel that?" Hunter asked as we bumped along the barely there trail. I nodded, not needing to ask what he meant. There was a heaviness in the air, a sense of anticipation that hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had, and we just hadn't noticed. We parked in the same spot as before and approached the cabin on foot. The rope we'd used to secure the door was still in place, undisturbed. The clearing was silent. No birds, no insects, just the occasional whisper of wind through the trees. "Let's be methodical," Hunter said as we reached the door. "Full documentation this time." I nodded, setting up a digital video camera on a tripod to record our investigation while Hunter took photographs of the exterior from every angle. When we finally entered the cabin, it felt different than before. Knowing what we now did about Thomas Reeves and his mysterious disappearance gave everything a new context. The neatly made bed, the carefully arranged shelves, the table set for two. All of it felt like evidence now, pieces of a puzzle we were struggling to assemble. "Let's start with the floor," Hunter suggested. "If there's any kind of hidden exit, that's the most likely place." We began a meticulous examination, tapping every floorboard, measuring dimensions, checking for any discrepancies. I ran my hands along the rough-hewn planks, feeling for seams or hinges, while Hunter used a metal detector to search for hidden hardware. After an hour, we'd found nothing. Every floorboard was solid, every measurement consistent with a standard one-room cabin. There was no hidden trapdoor, no secret exit. "Walls next," I said, trying to hide my frustration. The walls yielded no better results. The logs were solid, the chinking between them intact. There was no evidence of a secret door or removable panel. The roof, too, was solid. No hatch, no access point. By midday, we had examined every inch of the cabin and found absolutely nothing to explain how Thomas Reeves could have left with the door locked from the inside. It was, as Jenkins had said, a perfect mystery. "Let's take a break," Hunter suggested, seeing my growing frustration. "Get some fresh air, clear our heads." Outside, the day had grown overcast, the bright morning giving way to a dull gray afternoon. The clearing around the cabin seemed smaller somehow, the forest pressing in from all sides. "What about Hayes?" I said, staring into the trees. "Jenkins said they had some kind of disagreement about their research. What if it was something they discovered out here?" Hunter considered this. "Worth looking into, but it doesn't explain the locked door." "Maybe Hayes knows how Reeves got out," I suggested. "Maybe he's the only one who knows." Hunter nodded slowly. "I've got a buddy in the state police. Might be able to help us track Hayes down if he's still alive." We were about to return to the cabin when I noticed something. A faint path leading from the back of the clearing into the woods, barely visible among the underbrush. It certainly wasn't a maintained trail, but it was definitely a path, worn by repeated use. "Did you see this yesterday?" I asked, pointing it out to Hunter. He shook his head. "No, but we were focused on the cabin. You think it leads somewhere?" "Only one way to find out," I replied, already starting down the narrow track. The path wound through dense forest, overgrown but still discernible. It had clearly once been used regularly, though it seemed no one had walked it in years. Fallen branches and new growth obscured it in places, but the underlying trail was unmistakable. We followed it for about half a mile before it opened into another small clearing. And there in the center stood a stone structure, not a cabin but some kind of monument or marker. It was about 4 feet tall, roughly cylindrical, with symbols carved into its surface that I didn't recognize. "What is this?" Hunter asked, approaching it cautiously. I shook my head, equally baffled. The stone was weathered, covered in lichen in places, but the carvings were still clear. Spirals, angular shapes, and what looked like stylized human figures. "Maybe this is what they were researching," I suggested. "Hayes was an anthropologist, right? Studying frontier settlements and Native American sites." Hunter nodded, taking photographs of the stone from every angle. "But what does it have to do with Reeves' disappearance?" I circled the monument, examining it carefully. At the base, partially hidden by moss, I found an inscription, not in the strange symbols that covered the rest of the stone, but in English, crudely carved as if with a knife. Hayes was right, it follows. A chill ran down my spine. "Hunter, look at this." He crouched beside me, brushing away more of the moss to reveal the inscription. "Reeves," he said quietly. "Has to be, but what does it mean?" "It follows." "What follows?" Hunter stood up, scanning the surrounding forest. Whatever he thought was watching him from the trees. The silence of the clearing suddenly felt oppressive. The wind had died completely, leaving an unnatural stillness. I found myself straining to hear any sound, birds, insects, anything, but there was nothing. Just our own breathing and the faint rustle of our movements. "We should get back to the cabin," Hunter said, his voice unnaturally loud in the silence. "It'll be dark soon." I nodded, suddenly eager to leave this place. As we turned to go, I glanced back at the stone monument one last time and froze. Standing just beyond it, partially hidden by a tree, was a figure. It was tall and thin, unnaturally so, its proportions subtly wrong in a way that sent a wave of revulsion through me. I couldn't make out any details. It was as if the shadows beneath the trees had congealed into a vaguely human shape, but I could feel it watching us. "Hunter," I whispered, not taking my eyes off the figure. He turned, following my gaze. "What? I don't see," and then he did. I heard his sharp intake of breath, saw his hand move instinctively to his sidearm. "Hello," he called, his voice steady despite the tension I could feel radiating from him. "Park rangers, identify yourself." The figure didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there watching. Hunter drew his weapon. "Sir, I need you to step forward and identify yourself. Now." Still nothing. Just that silent, motionless presence at the edge of the clearing. Hunter started forward, and I followed, my own hand moving to my sidearm. We advanced slowly, cautiously, across the small clearing toward the figure, and then, between one step and the next, it was gone. Not like it had run away or ducked behind the tree. It was simply no longer there, as if it had never been. Hunter broke into a run, reaching the spot where the figure had stood and circling the tree. "Nothing," he called, scanning the surrounding forest. "No tracks, no sign anyone was here, just like the search party had reported 40 years ago." "Let's get back to the cabin," I said, a note of urgency in my voice that I couldn't suppress. Now, we half jogged back along the path, both of us constantly scanning the forest around us. Twice I thought I glimpsed movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. The cabin was exactly as we'd left it, the door standing open, our equipment untouched. But it no longer felt like an inanimate structure. It felt like it was watching us, waiting for us. "We need to get this equipment packed up," Hunter said, his voice deliberately calm. "Head back while we still have daylight." I nodded, already gathering the camera and tripod. Neither of us wanted to admit it, but we were both spooked, not just by what we'd seen or thought we'd seen in the clearing, but by the whole situation. The locked cabin with no escape, the missing researcher, the strange stone monument, and now a figure watching from the trees, just as Reeves had described 40 years earlier. As we worked, the light began to fade, the overcast sky darkening toward evening. We would have to hurry if we wanted to navigate the rough terrain back to the main road before nightfall. "Almost done," Hunter said, packing the last of the equipment into his bag. "Just need to secure the door again." I nodded, scanning the cabin one last time. My gaze fell on the table, still set for 2 after all these years. And suddenly, with absolute clarity, I knew. "Hunter," I said slowly, "the table set for 2. What if Reeves was expecting Hayes that night? What if Hayes was coming to the cabin, and Reeves was waiting for him?" Hunter paused, considering this. "But Jenkins said Hayes had an alibi. He was at a conference when Reeves disappeared." "That's what Hayes claimed," I pointed out. "What if he lied? What if he came here that night, and something happened?" "You think Hayes killed Reeves?" Hunter asked, his voice low. "But that still doesn't explain the locked door. And where's the body?" I shook my head. "I don't know, but I think Hayes is the key to all this. We need to find him." As we stepped outside, securing the door behind us, the forest had grown dark around us. The setting sun cast long shadows between the trees, and the wind had picked up, carrying a chill that cut through my jacket. We hurried back to the truck, both of us constantly looking over our shoulders. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming now, a prickling sensation at the back of my neck that wouldn't go away. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, and for just a moment, I thought I saw a tall, thin figure standing at the edge of the clearing, watching our departure. But when I blinked, it was gone. We drove in silence for several miles, both lost in our thoughts, before Hunter finally spoke. "We need to talk about what we saw back there." I nodded, my hands tight on the steering wheel. "That figure by the stone monument." "Yeah," Hunter hesitated. Did it look human to you?" I considered the question carefully. "Not entirely," I admitted. The proportions were wrong, too tall, too thin, but it was hard to see clearly, and it just vanished, Hunter added. "No sound, no movement, just gone." "Could have been a trick of the light," I suggested, not believing it myself. The shadows under those trees were pretty deep. Hunter didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet, thoughtful. "You know, my grandfather was half Blackfoot. He used to tell stories about creatures that lived in the deep woods, things that weren't quite human, that could mimic human shape but not perfectly. He called them walkers." I glanced at him, surprised. Hunter had never mentioned his indigenous heritage before, And he'd certainly never talked about believing in legends or creatures from folklore. "You think that's what we saw?" I asked, trying to keep the skepticism from my voice. He shrugged. "I'm not saying I believe in monsters, but whatever we saw back there, it wasn't normal, and it fits with what Reeves reported before he disappeared. Something watching from the trees. Something that wasn't quite right." I thought about the inscription on the stone monument. Hayes was right. It follows. Whatever Reeves and Hayes had been researching out there, it had led to something that frightened Reeves enough to carve that warning. "We need to find Hayes," I repeated. "If he's still alive, he might be the only one who knows what really happened." Hunter nodded. "I'll make some calls when we get back. If he's out there, we'll find him." As we emerged from the forest onto the main park road, I felt some of the tension leave my body. But the questions remained, swirling in my mind. What had happened to Thomas Reeves 40 years ago? How had he left a cabin locked from the inside? And what was the figure watching from the trees? Little did we know, the answers would be more disturbing than we could possibly imagine. The next morning, I arrived at the station to find Hunter already at his desk, a phone pressed to his ear. He waved me over as he finished the call. "That was my contact in the state police," he said, hanging up. "They found Hayes." My heart raced. "He's alive? Where is he?" "Alive, but not well," Hunter replied. "He's in a nursing home in Seattle. End-stage Alzheimer's. According to my contact, he has periods of lucidity, but they're becoming increasingly rare." I felt a mix of emotions. Disappointment that we might not get the answers we sought, but also a strange relief. Part of me had been afraid of what Hayes might tell us. "We should go see him," I said. "Today, if possible. Before he—" I didn't need to finish the sentence. Hunter nodded. "Already cleared it with the supervisor. We can take a personal day. It's about a 3-hour drive." The journey to Seattle passed in thoughtful silence. Both of us were processing what we'd experienced at the cabin, and both of us were wondering what Hayes might be able to tell us, if anything at all. The nursing home was a modern facility in a quiet suburb, its bright, antiseptic interior at odds with the dark mystery we were pursuing. The nurse who greeted us seemed surprised by our visit. "Dr. Hayes rarely gets visitors," she explained as she led us down a hallway. "Just his daughter sometimes, but she lives in Europe now." "What can you tell us about his condition?" Hunter asked. The nurse's expression was sympathetic. "He has good days and bad days. Today has been relatively good so far. He was a brilliant man, an anthropologist, did you know? But the disease," she shook her head, "it's taken so much from him. Still, there are moments when the old Dr. Hayes shines through." She paused outside a door. "Just don't expect too much. And if he becomes agitated, please call for assistance immediately." We nodded our understanding, and she opened the door. The room was small but comfortable, with a window overlooking a garden. In an armchair by the window sat an elderly man, thin and frail, his white hair sparse, his hands gnarled with arthritis. He was staring out at the garden, seemingly oblivious to our entrance. "Dr. Hayes," the nurse called gently. "You have visitors, park rangers from Blackwater Ridge." He turned slowly, his watery blue eyes focusing on us with surprising sharpness. For a moment, he said nothing, just studied us with an intensity that was almost unnerving. "Blackwater Ridge," he repeated finally, his voice stronger than I had expected. "You found the cabin." Hunter and I exchanged a glance. Not a question, a statement. "Yes, sir," I confirmed, stepping forward. "We found Thomas Reeves' cabin. We're trying to understand what happened to him." Hayes continued to stare at us for a long moment, then gestured to 2 chairs near his own. "Sit. You'll want to sit for this." As we took our seats, the nurse quietly excused herself, promising to check back soon. "How much do you know?" Hayes asked once we were alone. "We know Reeves disappeared in November 1983, Hunter began. That the cabin was locked from the inside with no other way out. That he left his dog behind. That he'd reported being watched by something in the weeks before he vanished." Hayes nodded slowly. "And you found the stone, the marker?" "Yes," I confirmed. "With the inscription." Hayes was right. "It follows." A shadow crossed the old man's face. "I told him not to publish. I told him we needed more evidence, more research. But Thomas was always impatient. Brilliant, but impatient." "Publish what exactly?" I pressed gently. Hayes's gaze drifted back to the window, to the garden beyond. For a moment I thought we'd lost him to his illness, but then he began to speak, his voice distant, as if reciting from memory. "We were documenting historical sites in the park, old trapper cabins, mining operations, Native American locations. But we found something else. Something that didn't fit any known pattern." He paused, his arthritic fingers tapping against the arm of his chair. The stone markers, they weren't created by any indigenous tribe we knew of, nor by European settlers. The symbols were unusual. Thomas thought they might be much older, pre-Columbian, perhaps even pre-human. Pre-human? Hunter echoed skeptically. Hayes's eyes snapped back to us, suddenly focused. There are things in this world that have been here longer than us, Ranger. Things that hide in the deep places, the dark places. Things that watch and wait. A chill ran down my spine. This was sounding too much like the ramblings of a man with dementia, and yet, there had been something watching us from the trees, something that vanished without a trace. What happened to Reeves? I asked, steering the conversation back to solid ground. Hayes was silent for a long moment. Thomas became obsessed with the markers. He started spending more time at the cabin, documenting them, trying to decipher the symbols. That's when he began to notice it. The watcher in the woods. What was it? Hunter asked. Hayes shook his head. I never saw it myself. Thomas described it as a tall, thin figure that would stand at the edge of the clearing, watching the cabin for hours. Never approaching, never leaving. Just watching. He thought it was connected to the markers somehow. And you didn't believe him, I guessed. I believed he saw something, Hayes corrected. But I thought it was likely a person. Maybe another researcher, maybe someone living off the grid. I didn't believe his theories about it being some ancient entity awakened by our discovery of the markers. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. We argued about it. I wanted to approach the situation methodically, scientifically. Thomas wanted to publish immediately, to alert the world to what he believed was a momentous discovery. We parted ways, and then he disappeared, Hunter prompted. Hayes nodded. His expression haunted. He called me the night before. Said he had proof now, evidence that couldn't be ignored. Asked me to come to the cabin the next day, said he'd make dinner, that we'd talk it through like old times. The table's set for two, I murmured. I was at a conference in Seattle, Hayes continued. I told him I couldn't get away. He sounded desperate, afraid, but also excited. Said if I wouldn't come, he'd document everything and mail it to me. That was the last time I spoke to him. And you never went to the cabin? Hunter asked. Hayes was silent for a long moment. No, he said finally. I never went back. But there was something in his tone, a hesitation that made me doubt his answer. Dr. Hayes, I said gently, we're not here to accuse you of anything. We just want to understand what happened. If you did go to the cabin that night. I didn't, he interrupted, more forcefully this time. I was in Seattle. Multiple witnesses confirmed that. The police investigated thoroughly. Then how did Reeves leave the cabin? Hunter asked. The door was locked from the inside. There were no windows, no other exits. It's impossible. Hayes turned to look out the window again, his profile sharp against the light. Not impossible, he said quietly. Just not explainable by conventional means. What does that mean? I pressed. He turned back to us, his eyes suddenly clear and focused. The markers aren't just stone monuments, they're boundaries, thresholds, places where the fabric between places grows thin. Places, Hunter repeated skeptically. Hayes ignored him, continuing as if in a trance. Thomas believed he had found a way to open that threshold, to step through, but he didn't understand what was on the other side, what might follow him back. A heavy silence fell over the room. Outside, clouds had darkened the sky, casting the garden in shadow. You're saying Reeves, walked into another dimension? I asked, trying to keep the incredulity from my voice. Hayes's expression was deadly serious. I'm saying Thomas found something he didn't understand, and it cost him everything. The inscription, Hunter said slowly. Hayes was right. It follows. What does that mean? A look of genuine fear crossed the old man's face. I warned him that if these entities existed, if they were real, then disturbing them would be dangerous. That they might notice us, follow us. Follow you where? I asked. Hayes's hands were trembling now. Everywhere, always watching, always just at the edge of your vision, following you home, standing outside your window at night, never approaching, never attacking, just following, watching, waiting. For what? Hunter asked. For you to let your guard down, Hayes whispered. For you to make a mistake, to lock yourself in without escape. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. And you think that's what happened to Reeves? This thing followed him, trapped him in the cabin? Hayes shook his head. No. I think Thomas tried to escape it the only way he thought he could. By using the threshold he believed he'd discovered. By stepping through. Through to where? Hunter asked. I don't know, Hayes admitted. No one does. No one who's gone through has ever come back. The room fell silent again. Outside, it had begun to rain, drops pattering against the window. Dr. Hayes, I said finally. Do you really believe all this, or is it just a theory? His eyes met mine, clear and lucid. I've spent 40 years trying not to believe it, Ranger, trying to convince myself it was all in Thomas's imagination, that he simply wandered off, got lost in the woods, died of exposure, that the locked door was some kind of mistake in our investigation. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. But I saw it too, in the end. After Thomas disappeared, when I finally went to the cabin to collect his research. Standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me, too tall, too thin, its proportions all wrong. And when I fled, it followed. Followed you where? Hunter asked. Everywhere, Hayes said simply. For years. Always at the corner of my vision. Always just out of sight when I turned to look. Standing outside my house at night. Watching from across the street. Following me from city to city as I tried to escape it. And now? I asked, my mouth dry. A sad smile crossed Hayes's face. Now I'm old and my mind is failing. Some days I don't remember my own name, let alone the horrors of the past. It's a blessing, in its way. I think it's lost interest in me now that I'm here, now that my mind is going. Or maybe it's still there and I just can't see it anymore. He reached out suddenly, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. But you found the cabin. You saw the marker. And I have to ask, have you noticed anything watching you since then? Standing just at the edge of your vision, following you home, I thought of the figure we'd seen by the stone monument, of the constant feeling of being watched as we drove away, of the shadows I'd thought I'd seen moving outside my window last night. No, I lied, meeting Hunter's eyes briefly. He gave a small nod, understanding my decision. We haven't seen anything unusual. Hayes studied my face for a long moment, then released my wrist. Good, he said, though he didn't sound convinced. That's good. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Dr. Hayes needs his rest now, she said gently but firmly. As we stood to leave, Hayes caught my arm once more. If you do see it, he whispered urgently, don't acknowledge it. Don't look directly at it. And whatever you do, don't try to approach it or communicate with it. Just pretend it isn't there. Maybe it will lose interest. Maybe it will find someone else to follow. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. And stay away from that cabin, Hayes added, his voice breaking. Board it up, burn it down, I don't care. But stay away from it, and especially from the stone marker. Some doors should remain closed. As we walked out of the nursing home into the rainy afternoon, neither Hunter nor I spoke for several minutes. The world around us seemed normal, ordinary, traffic moving on wet streets, people hurrying with umbrellas, the distant sound of a siren. But something had changed. So, Hunter said finally as we reached our vehicle, what do you think? Dementia? Guilt over abandoning his friend? Or he's telling the truth, I finished when he didn't continue. At least, his version of it. Hunter nodded slowly. We did see something in those woods. Something that vanished without a trace. Could have been a person, I suggested, not believing it myself. A hiker, maybe, who ran when we approached, without leaving footprints, without making a sound. Hunter shook his head. And that doesn't explain the locked door. How Reeves got out of that cabin without using the only exit. We drove in silence for a while, the rain drumming on the roof, the wipers keeping time like a metronome. The forest flanking the highway seemed darker somehow, deeper, as if the spaces between the trees held secrets we could never understand. What do we do now? Hunter asked, eventually. Report everything? Try to get permission for a full investigation of the cabin and the stone marker? I considered the question carefully. If we filed an official report about everything we'd seen and everything Hayes had told us, we'd be laughed out of the service. Ancient entities from another dimension? Thresholds between worlds? It sounded insane, but if we didn't report it, if we let it go, what then? Would someone else stumble upon that cabin someday, become fascinated by the mystery, start investigating the stone markers? Would they begin to notice a tall, thin figure watching them from the trees? We tell the truth, I decided. We found an abandoned cabin belonging to a man who disappeared in 1983. We found a stone marker with unusual carvings that may have been the subject of his research. We spoke to his former colleague, who is now suffering from Alzheimer's and whose recollections may not be reliable. And the figure we saw, Hunter asked. I hesitated. Inconclusive, possibly a person, possibly a shadow or trick of the light. Insufficient evidence to make a determination. Hunter nodded slowly. And the locked door, how Reeves got out? Unknown, I said simply. An enduring mystery. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was all we could safely report without risking our careers and reputations. The rest, Hayes' story, the watcher in the woods, the feeling of being followed, that would remain between us. As we neared the turnoff for the park, I glanced in the rearview mirror and felt my heart skip a beat. For just a moment, just a fraction of a second, I thought I saw a tall, thin figure standing at the edge of the forest beside the highway, watching our car pass. But when I looked again, there was nothing there, just trees, shadows, and the deepening twilight. We took the gun back to base, did a ton of research but never found out who had lived there, never resolved any of the mystery of what happened to them or how the door had seemingly locked itself, or of course how the owner just managed to vanish out of thin air. That's the official report anyway. The truth is something else entirely, something we carry with us, a weight on our shoulders, a shadow at the corner of our vision, something that follows us now, patient and watchful, waiting for us to let down our guard, just as it followed Thomas Reeves and Alan Hayes before us. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some doors better left closed, but it's too late for that now. It follows.